Dark, suspenseful music swells, underscored by the distant crash of waves. Narrator: a desperate letter lures Hercule Poirot to the cliffs of Merlinville-sur-Mer, where a wealthy man lies dead in a shallow grave, a letter opener in his back. Was it a robbery gone wrong, or a chilling act of revenge? As a second corpse surfaces and secrets unravel, Poirot's little grey cells face their toughest challenge yet. Who is the mysterious Baroldi? Why does a spirited actress keep appearing at every turn? And what deadly truth hides on the haunted fairways? Dive into murder on the links where every clue is a trap, and every suspect has a secret. Music crescendos fading into eerie silence. Chapter 1. The urgent summons. The late afternoon sun cast a golden haze over the bustling Victoria station, its rays slicing through the smoky air like a painter's brush. Hercule Poirot stood on the platform, his polished shoes gleaming, his moustache impeccably waxed, and his eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a hawk. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings adjusted his hat, his fingers fidgeting with a nervous energy that betrayed his excitement. The Calais Express loomed before them, its black handled engine hissing steam, ready to whisk them across the Channel to France. The air thrummed with the clatter of porters, the chatter of travellers, and the distant whistle of departing trains. "Mon ami Poirot," said his voice, crisp with a faint Belgian lilt, "you must not fidget so. It disturbs the symmetry of the moment." He reached out, his gloved hand deftly straightening Hastings' crooked tie with a tut of disapproval. "The tie, it is the window to the soul's order. Yours, I fear, is in disarray." Hastings grinned, unperturbed. "Oh, come off it, Poirot. I'm just eager to get moving. This letter from Renaud sounds like a proper mystery. A man in fear for his life, shadowy threats. Why, it's straight out of A Penny Dreadful." Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained stern. "A Penny Dreadful. Nan, Hastings, the letter of Monsieur Paul Renaud is no fiction. It is a cry for help, and we, Hercule Poirot and his faithful companion, shall answer it with the utmost seriousness." The letter in question, now tucked securely in Poirot's breast pocket, had arrived at their Baker Street lodgings 2 days prior. Written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, it bore the postmark of Merlinville-sur-Mer, a sleepy coastal town in northern France. Paul Renaud, a South American businessman of considerable wealth, had penned a desperate plea. "Monsieur Poirot, I am in grave danger. A shadow hangs over me, one I cannot escape. I beg you, come at once. My life depends on it." The letter's vagueness only deepened its urgency, and Poirot, ever intrigued by the puzzle of human fear, had booked their passage immediately. As they boarded the train, Hastings' eyes darted to a young woman standing near the first-class carriage. She was striking, with auburn hair pinned loosely beneath a fashionable cloche hat, her green eyes flashing with an impish spark. She leaned out of an open window, her lips parting in a sudden exclamation. "Hell!" The word, sharp and unladylike, cut through the platform's din, drawing a few raised eyebrows. She laughed, unabashed, pointing at the rolling countryside beyond. "Would you look at that view? It's positively devilish how pretty it is." Hastings' jaw slackened, his cheeks flushing. "Well, I say," he muttered, nudging Poirot. "She's got spirit, hasn't she?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Spirit, oui, but also a disregard for decorum. Be cautious, Hastings. A woman who shouts hell in public may be more trouble than your heart can handle." "Nonsense," Hastings replied, his gaze lingering on the woman as she disappeared into the carriage. "She's just lively, that's all. Adds a bit of color to the journey." They settled into their compartment, a plush affair with velvet seats and polished wood paneling. Poirot, ever methodical, arranged his belongings with surgical precision, his hat on the rack, his walking stick propped, just so. His notebook and pen aligned at perfect angles on the fold-down table. Hastings, by contrast, tossed his coat haphazardly and slouched back, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Tell me, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence as the train lurched forward, "what do you make of Renaud's letter? He's a rich chap, isn't he? Made his fortune in South America, I heard. Mining or some such. Why would a man like that be so frightened?" Poirot folded his hands, his eyes half closed as if peering into some invisible tapestry. "The wealth of a man, Hastings, does not shield him from fear. Often, it invites it. Monsieur Renaud speaks of a shadow. This is not a mere metaphor. It suggests a past, a secret, perhaps a sin. Men do not write such letters unless the past has begun to claw at the present. Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing. You think he's being blackmailed, or hunted, maybe. Some old rival from his mining days. Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice soft but sharp. But we must not speculate without facts. The little grey cells, they require evidence, not imagination. For now, we know only that Monsieur Renaud is afraid, and that fear has brought us to France. The train's rhythm settled into a steady clack-clack, the English countryside blurring into a patchwork of green fields and grey stone walls. Hastings' thoughts wandered back to the young woman. He hadn't caught her name, but her boldness intrigued him. He imagined striking up a conversation, perhaps offering to carry her bag or commenting on the scenery. The thought made him smile, though he quickly masked it under Poirot's watchful gaze. The journey across the channel was uneventful, save for a brief squall that rocked the ferry and sent Hastings scrambling for a railing. Poirot, unruffled, sipped a cup of tea in the lounge, his composure unshaken even as the waves churned. By evening, they were aboard another train, this one rattling through the French countryside, toward Merlinville-sur-Mer. The landscape shifted to rolling hills and vineyards, the air carrying a faint salt temp from the nearby coast. That as they neared their destination, Poirot grew quieter, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. Hastings, sensing his friend's focus, tried to lighten the mood. You know, Poirot, this place sounds charming. Merlinville-sur-Mer, golf courses, seaside villas, the lot. Maybe we'll have time for a round or two after we sort out Reynolds' troubles. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Golf, Hastings. A game of chasing little balls across the grass. Nan, I prefer the pursuit of truth. It is a far more satisfying sport. Hastings chuckled, but his laughter faded as the train slowed, its brakes screeching. The conductor's voice echoed through the carriage. Merlinville-sur-Mer, prochaine arrêt. The platform, when they stepped onto it, was quieter than Victoria, bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps. A cool breeze carried the scent of sea and pine, and in the distance, the silhouette of a grand villa loomed against the twilight sky. Villa Genevieve, Renaud's home. A carriage awaited them, its driver a stooped man with a weathered face who introduced himself as Pierre. His English was halting, his manner nervous. Monsieur Renaud, he expects you, Pierre said, his eyes darting toward the villa. But there is trouble, much trouble. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Trouble, monsieur, of what nature? Pierre hesitated, wiping his hands on his coat. I cannot say, only that the house, it is not right, you will see. Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot, his pulse quickening. The driver's unease was palpable, and as they climbed into the carriage, the mystery of Paul Renaud's letter seemed to deepen. The road to the villa wound through a grove of cypress trees, their shadows dancing in the moonlight. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? What do you suppose is waiting for us? Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of anticipation. What awaits us, Hastings, is the truth. And the truth, it is never as simple as it seems. The carriage rattled on, the villa's lights growing brighter. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, its cry sharp and fleeting. Hastings felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the weight of the unknown. Whatever lay ahead at Villa Genevieve, he knew one thing for certain. With Hercule Poirot at his side, no secret would remain buried for long. Chapter 2. The body in the bunker. The sun hung low over Merlinville-sur-Mer, casting a golden haze across the rolling fairways of the golf course that bordered Villa Genevieve. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes gleaming despite the dusty road, strode purposefully beside Captain Arthur Hastings, whose tie still slightly askew-flapped in the warm French breeze. The air carried the faint tinge of salt from the nearby sea, but an undercurrent of unease had settled over the duo. Since their arrival in this picturesque corner of France, Paul Renaud's urgent letter, its words dripping with cryptic dread, had summoned them from London, and now, as they approached the grand villa, Poirot's sharp eyes darted about, cataloguing every detail: the neatly trimmed hedges, the polished brass knocker, the distant hum of a gardener's shears. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his hat with a precise flick, "you must learn to observe. The world, it speaks to those who listen, and in a case such as this, every whisper counts." Hastings, whose thoughts were still tangled with the spirited young woman from the Calais Express, her bold hell still echoing in his mind, nodded absently. "Right, of course, Poirot, but what do you make of Renaud's letter?" "A shadow moves before me," he wrote. "Sounds like the poor chap was terrified." "Terrified, yes," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. "But of what? Or of whom? That is the question. And why summon Hercule Poirot if the danger was so imminent? Nan, Hastings, there is a method to this madness, and we shall uncover it." Their conversation was cut short as they reached the villa's iron gates, which stood ajar, an ominous invitation. A uniformed gendarme, his face pale and his cap slightly askew, hurried toward them. "Monsieur Poirot," he asked, his voice tight with urgency, "you are expected, but I must warn you it is not a pleasant sight." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, merely gesturing for the gendarme to lead the way. Hastings, his stomach twisting with anticipation, followed closely, his earlier musings about the mysterious train passenger fading as the gravity of the moment settled in. They were led not to the villa's grand entrance, but around its side, through a manicured garden that gave way to the edge of the Merlinville golf course. The fairway stretched out, pristine and serene, save for a cluster of figures gathered near a sandbunker some 50 yards away. The scene was jarring. The lush green contrasted sharply with the grim tableau of men in dark uniforms, their voices low and urgent. As Poirot and Hastings approached, a young officer broke away from the group, his stride brisk and his expression one of barely concealed disdain. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," the officer said, his tone clipped. "I am Inspector Lucien Giraud of the Paris Street. I regret to inform you that your services, while appreciated, are unnecessary. The matter is well in hand." Poirot's lips curled into a polite, almost predatory smile. "Is that so, Monsieur Giraud? And yet, I was summoned by Monsieur Renaud himself. Perhaps you will permit me to see for myself what is well in hand." His jaw tightened, but he stepped aside with a curt nod. "As you wish, but I warn you, it's not a sight for amateurs." Hastings bristled at the slight, but Poirot merely raised an eyebrow and moved forward, his small frame exuding quiet authority. The crowd parted, revealing the heart of the tragedy, a shallow, freshly dug grave within the sandbunker, its edges uneven and hasty, and there, half covered by loose soil, lay the body of Paul Renaud. The sight was grotesque. Renaud, a man whose wealth and charisma had been legendary even in London circles, was now a pale, lifeless figure. His tailored suit was smeared with dirt, and a letter opener protruded from his back, its silver handle glinting cruelly in the sunlight. His face, frozen in a rictus of shock, stared blankly at the sky, and one arm was flung outward as if reaching for salvation that never came. The oversized overcoat draped over his body seemed oddly out of place, its sleeves too long, its fit too loose for the man's frame. Hastings swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Good Lord, Poirot. Stabbed in the back and buried here. It's barbaric." Poirot said nothing at first, his eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the sand, and examined the letter opener. "Curio," he murmured. "The wound is precise. Nan, a single thrust, deep and deliberate. This was not a crime of passion, Hastings, but one of calculation." Giraud, hovering nearby, scoffed. "Calculation? The man was ambushed, likely by a vagrant or a thief. We found footprints leading to the woods, clumsy ones, I might add. The case is straightforward." "Straightforward?" Poirot's tone was deceptively mild. "Then perhaps you can explain, Monsieur Giraud, why a thief would use a letter opener, a weapon of elegance rather than a knife or a club, and why bury the body in a bunker, where it would surely be found by the first golfer to pass by." Giraud's face reddened, but before he could retort, a second figure approached, a bespectacled man in a rumpled suit, carrying a black medical bag. "Dr. Durand," he introduced himself, nodding to Poirot, the coroner. "I've examined the body. Death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m., caused by the stab wound. The letter opener pierced the heart. He was likely dead before he hit the ground." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the oversized overcoat. "And this garment, Doctor, it is not Monsieur Renaud's, I presume?" Durand hesitated, glancing at Giraud. "It does not fit him. No. Too large by far. We believe it belongs to his son, Jack Renaud. The initials JRR embroidered inside." "Jack Renaud," Poirot repeated, his voice soft but laden with significance. "And where is the young Monsieur Renaud now?" Giraud crossed. "His arms, missing, as it happens, likely fled after the deed. We're searching for him now." Poirot's mustache twitched again, a sure sign of his skepticism. He turned back to the body, his fingers brushing the edge of Renaud's coat pocket. With a delicate motion, he extracted a folded piece of paper, its edges slightly crumpled. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he read. "What's that?" Hastings asked, craning his neck. "A letter," Poirot said, his voice low. "Or part of one. Addressed to Moncoeur, a term of endearment, perhaps, but not for Madame Renaud. I think." He held the paper up to the light, revealing elegant, looping handwriting. "My heart, I cannot bear the thought of losing you. Meet me tonight, where the stars touch the sea." Giraud snatched the letter from Poirot's hand, scanning it quickly. "A love letter? Bah! Probably some old flame of Renaud's. It means nothing." "Nothing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "On the contrary, Monsieur Giraud, it means everything. A man does not carry such a letter in his pocket on the night of his death by mere chance." Hastings, still processing the grim scene, felt a pang of unease. "Poirot, you don't think... Could this be connected to the shadow Renaud mentioned in his letter to you?" "Precisement," Poirot said, rising to his feet and dusting off his trousers. "The shadow moves, Hastings, and we must follow its trail." The group was interrupted by a commotion at the villa's edge. A woman's voice, sharp and anguished, cut through the morning air. "Paul! Oh, Paul!" Eloise Renaud, her face pale and her dark hair disheveled, stumbled toward the bunker, supported by a maid. Her silk dressing gown trailed in the grass, and her eyes were wide with horror as she saw the body. "Madame Renaud," Poirot said gently, stepping forward to block her view. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are here to help." Eloise's gaze darted to the grave, then back to Poirot. "He's dead, isn't he, my Paul? Murdered." Her voice broke, and she swayed, the maid catching her arm. Giraud stepped in, his tone brusque. "Madame, we need to ask you some questions. When did you last see your husband?" Eloise's eyes filled with tears. "Last night, after dinner. He said he had business to attend to. Something about the golf course. I went to bed, and when I woke, he was gone." Poirot's head tilted, his expression unreadable. "Business on the golf course. At night. Most unusual. Madame, did he mention what this business was?" "No," Eloise whispered, her voice trembling. "He was distracted, nervous. I thought it was just his work, but now..." She buried her face in her hands. Hastings, ever the gentleman, stepped forward, offering his handkerchief. There, madame. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise." Poirot shot Hastings a wry glance but said nothing, his attention returning to the scene. He paced the edge of the bunker, his eyes scanning the sand, the grass, the nearby bushes. Then, with a sudden movement, he knelt again, plucking something from the ground, a single, delicate petal, its vibrant pink stark against the green. "A flower," he murmured, "from a rose, perhaps, but not one grown here. Curious, Nan." Giraud rolled his eyes. "A petal. You waste your time, Poirot. The footprints, the overcoat, the letter opener, those are the clues that matter." Poirot's smile was infuriatingly serene. "We shall see, Monsieur Giraud, we shall see." As the coroner's men prepared to remove Reynolds' body, pulled Hastings aside, his voice low. "Mon ami, this case is not what it seems. The overcoat, the letter, the petal, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they form is still hidden. And this Inspector Giraud," he shook his head, "he sees only the surface. We must dig deeper." Hastings nodded, though his mind was already wandering back to the train, to the young woman with the bold laugh and the sparkling eyes. "Right, Poirot. Where do we start?" "With the villa," Poirot said firmly. "And with Madame Her grief is real, but her story, I am not so sure." They turned back toward Villa Genevieve, where Eloise Renaud was being led inside by the maid. The golf course, now empty save for the lingering gendarmes, seemed to hum with secrets, its fairways stretching into the distance like a challenge. Poirot adjusted his hat once more, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Come, Hastings," he said. "The game, it has begun." The interior of Villa Genevieve was as opulent as its exterior promised, with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with vibrant oil paintings of seascapes and pastoral scenes. Yet, the air was heavy with tension, the grandeur overshadowed by the tragedy that had unfolded just beyond its gates. Eloise Renaud sat in a backed chair in the drawing-room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. The maid, a stout woman named Celeste, hovered nearby, offering tea that went untouched. Poirot, seated opposite Eloise, leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "Madame, I know this is a difficult time, but I must ask you to recount the events of last night. Every detail, no matter how small, may be of importance." Eloise nodded, her voice steady despite her evident grief. Paul was not himself. He's always been a man of energy, of confidence, but last night he was agitated. He barely touched his dinner roast lamb, his favorite. He kept glancing at the window, as if expecting someone. "Someone," Poirot prompted, his tone gentle, but probing. "I don't know," Eloise admitted. "He didn't say." Around 9 o'clock, he received a telephone call. He took it in his study, and when he returned, he was even more distracted. "He told me he had to step out, that it was urgent. I begged him to stay, but he insisted. He said he'd be back before midnight, and you did not see him again?" Poirot asked. Eloise shook her head, a tear escaping. "No, I went to bed around 10. Celeste locked the doors. As always, I assumed Paul had his key. When I awoke this morning and he wasn't there, I thought perhaps he'd stayed out late with business associates. Then the police came." Hastings, standing near the fireplace, frowned. "Madame, did your husband have any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm?" Eloise hesitated, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief Hastings had given her. Paul was a successful man. Success breeds envy, Captain Hastings. But enemies? I can't think of anyone who would. Who would do this? Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained soft. "And your son, Jack, where was he last night?" Eloise's expression faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Jack, he and Paul had argued recently, about money, mostly. Jack is young, impulsive. He wants to make his own way, but Paul was strict with him. Jack was in his room last night, I believe. He keeps to himself these days." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. "Merci, Madame, you have been most helpful. If you will permit, I would like to see Monsieur Renaud's study." Eloise gestured weakly, toward a hallway of course. "Celeste will show you." The maid led them to a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. The study was a masculine domain, with dark leather furniture, a mahogany desk, and shelves lined with books on finance and South American history. A large window overlooked the golf course, its view now marred by the memory of the bunker beyond. Poirot moved to the desk, his fingers tracing the edges of a blotter stained with ink. "Hastings, observe," he said, pointing to a small brass paperweight, shaped like a jaguar. "This is from South America, Nan. A curious choice for a Frenchman." Hastings shrugged. "Renaud made his fortune there, didn't he? Stands to reason he'd have some keepsakes." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, opening a drawer. Inside, he found a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with cryptic numbers and initials. A code, perhaps, or a ledger of some kind. "We shall see." As Hastings peered over his shoulder, a faint rustling came from outside the window. Both men froze, their eyes darting to the glass. The curtain swayed slightly, though no breeze stirred the room. Poirot moved swiftly, pulling the curtain aside to reveal nothing but the empty lawn beyond. "Imagination, perhaps," Hastings said, though his voice lacked conviction. Poirot's expression was grim. "Nan, mon ami, not imagination. Someone was here, listening, and they are still close." They returned to the drawing room, where Giraud awaited, his arms crossed and his expression sour. "Well, Poirot, found any more petals to waste your time on?" Poirot ignored the jab, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Monsieur Giraud, have you searched the grounds beyond the bunker? The woods?" Perhaps Giraud smirked. "Of course. My men are combing the area now. We'll have our killer by nightfall." "Then I wish you luck," Poirot said, his tone laced with irony. "But I suspect, monsieur, that this killer is not so easily caught." As they stepped back into the garden, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The golf course, so serene in the morning light, now seemed to pulse with menace, its shadows hiding secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot, undeterred, walked toward the bunker once more, his steps measured, his mind racing. "Hastings," he said softly, "this case, it is like the golf itself. One must anticipate the curves, the hazards, the hidden traps, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall not be outplayed." Chapter 3. The Bound Wife's Tale. The morning sun spilled over Merlinville-sur-Mer, painting the cliffs and the sprawling golf course in hues of gold and amber. The air carried the salty tang of the sea, mingling with the faint scent of freshly cut grass from the fairways. Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stepped out of their hired car, their boots crunching on the gravel drive leading to Villa Genevieve. The villa itself was a vision of French elegance, white stucco walls, green shutters, and climbing roses framing the entrance. Yet an oppressive stillness hung over the place, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting for the tragedy within to be unveiled. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the scene. "Mon ami," he said, his voice low but sharp, "observe the silence. It is not the calm of peace, but the hush of secrets." Hastings, still shaken from the grim discovery of Paul Renaud's body in the bunker, nodded absently. His thoughts, however, were not entirely on the murder. The spirited young woman from the train, the one who had exclaimed, "Hell!" with such unladylike gusto lingered in his mind. Her auburn hair, her impish grin, her defiance of convention, they had captivated him in a way he hadn't expected. He shook his head, trying to focus. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" "The police seem certain it's a straightforward case." Green eyes glinted with disdain. "Straightforward? Bah! Inspector Giraud sees only what lies before his nose: a body, a knife, a motive. But the truth, Hastings, it hides in the shadows of the mind, in the motives that twist like the roots of an old tree." He tapped his temple. "The little grey cells, they are already at work." They were met at the villa's entrance by a hurried-looking maid, her apron slightly askew, her eyes red from crying. "Monsieur Poirot, Capitaine Hastings," she stammered. "The police are inside with Madame Renaud." It's terrible, messieurs." "Calm yourself, Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, though his gaze was sharp. "Take us to Madame Renaud at once." The maid led them through a grand foyer adorned with crystal chandeliers and marble floors, then up a winding staircase to a bedroom on the second floor. The room was a study in opulent silk drapes, a four-poster bed with intricate carvings, and a vanity cluttered with perfumes and powders, but the scene within was anything but serene. Eloise Renaud, Paul's widow, sat on the edge of the bed, her wrists still marked with red welts from the ropes that had bound her. Her blonde hair, usually impeccably styled, fell in disarray around her pale face. Two gendarmes stood nearby, one scribbling notes, while Inspector Giraud paced the room like a caged panther. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Giraud said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Come to meddle, have you? This case requires no Belgian dandy with a waxed mustache. We have the facts: a murder, a bound widow, and a clear trail to the culprit." Poirot's smile was tight, almost predatory. "Facts, Monsieur Giraud, are like pebbles on a beach. Many, but only a few are precious. Perhaps you will permit me to examine these pebbles." Giraud snorted but waved a hand dismissively. "Do as you like, but don't interfere with my men." Poirot ignored him, turning to Eloise Renaud. "Madame, my deepest sympathies for your loss. May I ask you to recount what happened last night? Every detail, if you please." Eloise's hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. Her voice, when she spoke, was fragile, like porcelain on the verge of cracking. "It was late, past midnight. Paul and I were in bed when we heard a noise downstairs, a crash, like glass breaking. Paul went to investigate. I begged him not to, but he insisted. Then I heard voices, angry voices, and a struggle. Before I could follow, two men burst into the room. They wore masks, black cloth, with slits for eyes. One of them grabbed me, tied my wrists and ankles, and gagged me with a cloth. I heard Paul cry out, and then silence." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Hastings, standing near the door, felt a pang of sympathy. "How dreadful, madame," he said softly. "Did you see anything that might identify these men?" Eloise shook her head. Their masks hid their faces. "But one of them," his voice was rough, like gravel. "He said something about finishing it. I don't know what he meant." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the other, madame, did he speak?" "Yes," she whispered. "He was quieter, almost gentle. He told me not to struggle, that it would be over soon. But his eyes, they were cold, like a snake's." Poirot nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on his cane. "And after they left you, what then?" "I don't know how long I was alone. It felt like hours. I tried to free myself, but the ropes were too tight. Then, this morning, the maid found me and called the police." Giraud interjected, holding up a slender dagger with an ornate handle. "This was found near the body. Madame Do you recognize it? Eloise's eyes widened. That's mine. It was a gift from Paul, years ago. I kept it on my vanity. She gestured to the cluttered table, where a small stand now stood empty. Giraud's lips curled into a smirk. Convenient, no. The murder weapon belongs to the victim's wife, who claimed she was bound and helpless. Poirot's mustache twitched. Convenient, perhaps, but not conclusive. Monsieur Giraud, a weapon left so prominently is a message, not a mistake. Tell me, madame, was this dagger always on display? Yes, Eloise said, her voice steadier. Now, anyone who visited this room could have seen it. Precisement, Poirot murmured. He moved to the vanity, his gloved fingers brushing over the surface. His eyes caught on a faint smudge of powder-face powder, perhaps, or something else. He filed it away for later. Hastings, meanwhile, was struggling to keep his thoughts on the case, the image of the auburn-haired woman from the train, her mischievous laugh, her bold declaration kept intruding. He cleared his throat, trying to refocus. Poirot, could it have been a robbery gone wrong? Renaud was wealthy, after all. Poirot's gaze flicked to him, amused. A robbery, mon ami. And yet, nothing is missing. Jewelry, money, all untouched. No, this is personal. The heart of this crime lies in passion, in secrets. He turned back to Eloise. Madame, had your husband any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm? Eloise hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Paul was private. He didn't speak much of his business, but lately, he was troubled. He received letters, strange ones, with no signature. He burned them, but I saw one once. It said, "You cannot hide forever." Poirot's eyes gleamed. And where did he keep these letters? In his study, locked in a drawer. But he burned the last one 2 days ago. Giraud scoffed. Letters, masks, mysterious voices. This is a melodrama, not evidence. I'll have the truth from the servants and the son. Jack Renaud has motive, his father's fortune. Poirot ignored him, his attention now on the floor near the bed. He knelt, his movements precise, and picked up a torn scrap of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. It bore a single word in smudged ink, Brody. He slipped it into his pocket without a word, his expression unreadable. Madame Poirot said, rising, "You have been most helpful. Rest now, we will speak again." As they left the room, Giraud muttered, "You waste time with theatrics, Poirot. The son is missing. The wife's dagger was used. Mark my words, this is a family affair." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps, Monsieur Giraud, but families, like houses, have many rooms, and some are locked tighter than others. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the golf course. Hastings followed Poirot as he wandered toward the crime scene, his cane tapping rhythmically. "What do you make of her story, Poirot? It's ghastly masked men, a midnight attack. Do you believe her?" Poirot paused, gazing out at the fairway where Renaud's body had been found. "Believe, Hastings, I neither believe nor disbelieve. I observe. Madame Renaud's distress is real, but her story, it has holes, like a moth-eaten coat. The ropes, for instance, tight, yes, but not so tight as to leave deep marks, and the dagger, so conveniently hers. Yet, her fear is genuine. Why?" Hastings frowned. "You think she's hiding something. I think, mon ami, that everyone hides something. The question is, what, and why?" He tapped the pocket where he'd stowed the scrap of paper. "This Baroldi, it is a name, perhaps, or a code. It is a thread, and I shall pull it until the tapestry unravels." They reached the edge of the golf course, where the police had cordoned off the shallow grave. The earth was still disturbed, the grass torn where Renaud's body had been dragged. Poirot crouched, examining the ground with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "Look here, Hastings," he said, pointing to a faint footprint in the soft earth. "Small, delicate. A woman's, perhaps." Hastings squinted. "Could be, but there are dozens of footprints. Here's the police, the groundskeeper. Oui, but this one is apart, near the hedge. It was made after the rain last night, for it is clear and unmarred. Someone was here, watching, perhaps, or waiting." Hastings shivered, the image of masked intruders vivid in his mind. "You think it's connected to the murder?" Poirot stood, brushing dirt from his gloves. "Everything is connected, Hastings. The trick is to see the pattern." As they returned to the villa, Hastings' thoughts strayed again to the girl from the train. He hadn't seen her since their brief encounter, but her presence felt like a spark in his otherwise orderly world. Poirot, he ventured, do you think it's possible to be distracted by someone, even in the middle of a case like this? Poirot's eyes twinkled with mischief. Mon cher Hastings, the heart is a most inconvenient organ, always falling in love at the worst possible moment. But tell me, who is this distraction? Hastings blushed. Oh, just someone I met on the train. She was lively, said Hell, right out loud when she saw the cliffs. Not the usual sort, you know. Poirot chuckled. A woman of spirit. Be careful, Hastings. Such women are like fire, beautiful, but they burn if you are not cautious. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the villa's gate. A young woman, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, was arguing with a gendarme. I demand to see Captain Hastings, she declared, her voice carrying a mix of indignation and amusement. He'll vouch for me. Hastings' heart leaped. It was her, the girl from the train. Poirot, that's her, he whispered, hurrying forward. The gendarme, unimpressed, blocked her path. No visitors, mademoiselle. This is a crime scene. Hastings stepped in, his face flushed. It's all right, officer, I know her. She's a friend. The girl flashed a triumphant grin. See, told you. She extended a hand to Hastings. Dulcie Duvan, actress extraordinaire, and you must be the famous Hercule Poirot. I've heard you're frightfully clever. Poirot bowed, his eyes studying her keenly. Mademoiselle Duvan, a pleasure. And what brings an actress to Merlinville on such a grim day? Dulcie's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Oh, just passing through. I heard about the murder, ghastly business. Thought I'd see if I could help. I'm good at noticing things, you know. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but Hastings could tell he was intrigued. Noticing things, mademoiselle, that is a talent most valuable. Perhaps you will share what you have noticed. Dulcie laughed, a sound like bells. Oh, I don't give away my secrets that easily, Monsieur Poirot, but I'll keep my eyes open. You never know what I might stumble across. As she sauntered away, Hastings stared after her, utterly smitten. She's remarkable, isn't she? Poirot's smile was wry. Remarkable, yes, and convenient. Her appearance here. Coincidences, Hastings, are rarely what they seem. Back inside the villa, Poirot requested access to Paul Renaud's study. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Dark wood paneling, heavy curtains, and a massive desk cluttered with papers. A locked drawer caught Poirot's attention. With the maid's permission, he picked the lock with a deftness that surprised Hastings. Inside, they found a single item, a photograph of a young woman, her face strikingly similar to Eloise's, but younger, with a mischievous glint in her eyes. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "To Paul, forever yours, E.B.E.B." Poirot murmured, "Eloise Baroldi, perhaps, or another piece of the puzzle." Hastings frowned. "Baroldi again. That's the name on the scrap of paper. Do you think it's significant?" "Significant?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is the key, Hastings. But to what lock, we shall see." The rest of the day was spent interviewing the villa's staff, a cook who swore she heard nothing, a gardener who claimed to have seen a shadowy figure near the golf course at dusk, and a butler who seemed oddly evasive about Paul Renaud. Recent visitors. Each conversation added a fragment to Poirot's mental mosaic, though he shared little with Hastings, who was growing increasingly frustrated. As evening fell, they retired to a small inn on the outskirts of Merlinville. Over a modest dinner of coq au vin and a crisp white wine, Hastings couldn't resist venting. "Poirot, you're being awfully secretive. What's this Baroldi business? And do you really think Eloise is telling the truth?" Poirot sipped his wine, his expression serene. "Patience, mon ami. The truth is like a fine wine, it must breathe before it reveals its full flavor. Madame Renaud's story is a performance, carefully rehearsed, but not without cracks. The Baroldi is old, perhaps a scandal, perhaps a crime, and Mademoiselle Duvan, her arrival is too perfect. She is either a gift or a trap." Hastings groaned. "You see conspiracies everywhere." "Not conspiracies, Hastings. Patterns, and the pattern here is one of deception, woven by someone with a very clever mind." That night, as Hastings lay in bed, his thoughts were a jumble of Eloise's tearful tale, the mysterious Baroldi name, and Dulcie Duvan's dazzling smile. He drifted to sleep, unaware that Poirot was still awake, pacing his room, his little grey cells working tirelessly to untangle the web of lies surrounding Villa Genevieve. The next morning, Poirot was up early, his energy undiminished. He dragged Hastings back to the golf course, where he examined the hedge near the footprint he'd found. "Look, Hastings," he said, pointing to a broken twig. "Someone stood here, perhaps watching the villa. And see this." He held up a single pearl, its luster dulled by dirt. A woman's earring, perhaps, or a deliberate clue. Hastings shook his head. "You're impossible, Poirot. How do you even notice these things?" Poirot tapped his temple. "The eyes see, but the mind observes. Now, come, we must speak to the gardener again. His story about the shadowy figurette does not sit right." The gardener, a grizzled man named Pierre, was reluctant to talk, but Poirot's charmant, a discreet bribe, loosened his tongue. "I didn't want to say before messieurs, but the figure I saw, it wasn't a man, it was a woman. I'm sure of it. She wore a dark cloak, but her hair it was light, like Madame Renaud's." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "And where did she go, this woman?" "Toward the cliffs," Pierre said, pointing to the rugged coastline. "I didn't follow. It was dark, and I was afraid." As they left the gardener, Hastings couldn't contain his excitement. A woman by the cliffs, that could be the key. Poirot, maybe she's the one who left the footprint. The pearl. "Calm yourself, Hastings," Poirot said, though his own excitement was evident. "We follow the thread, but we do not pull too hard, lest it snap." Their next stop was the local telegraph office, where Poirot sent a cryptic message to an old friend in Paris, requesting information on E.B. and the Baroldi affair. Hastings, frustrated by Poirot's secrecy, pressed him for answers, but Poirot only smiled. "All in good time, mon ami. The truth is like a shy bird, it must be coaxed, not chased." As they walked back to the inn, they passed a small cafe where Dulcie Duvin sat at an outdoor table, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. She waved them over, her smile infectious. "Fancy meeting you here. Any progress on your murder mystery?" Hastings grinned, unable to help himself. "We're making headway, Miss Duvin, but it's complicated." Dulcie leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "Complicated? Oh, I love complicated. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, have you found any juicy secrets yet?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Secrets, mademoiselle, are like stars hidden by day, but shining brightly when the light is right. Perhaps you have a secret or two of your own." Dulcie laughed, undaunted. "Oh, I'm an open book, Monsieur Poirot, but I'll let you know if I stumble across anything mysterious." As they parted ways, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that Dulcie knew more than she let on. "She's charming, Poirot, but do you think she's involved?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Involved? Perhaps not in the crime, but in the story, most certainly. Everyone, Hastings, plays a part in this drama. The question is, who wrote the script?" The day ended with Poirot poring over a map of Merlinville, marking the villa, the golf course, and the cliffs. "The stage is set," he murmured, "but the players, they are not all what they seem." As night fell, Hastings lay awake, his mind racing with questions. Who was the woman by the cliffs? What did Baroldi mean? And why did Dulcie Duvin keep appearing, like a melody he couldn't forget? The mystery of Paul Renaud's murder was deepening, and with every step, the shadows grew longer, the secrets darker. Only Poirot, with his relentless little grey cells, seemed certain that the truth was within reach if only they could find the right key. Chapter 4. The rival detectives' wager. The morning sun draped Merlinville-sur-Mer in a golden haze, its rays glinting off the dew-soaked fairways of the golf course adjacent to Villa Genevieve. The air carried the faint temps of salt from the nearby sea, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil where Paul Renaud's body had been found. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his polished shoes and neatly pressed suit, stood at the edge of the crime scene, his moustache twitching. As he surveyed the trampled grass, beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings adjusted his hat, his eyes darting nervously toward the villa, where the weight of tragedy still hung like a storm cloud. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity. "Observe the chaos. The ground, it tells a story, but only to those who listen with care." Hastings squinted at the churned earth, seeing little beyond the mess left by the police. "Looks like a herd of elephants stampeded through here," he muttered. "Hardly a clue to be found." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "On the contrary, Hastings, the chaos itself is the clue. Too many feet, too many hands, and yet, not enough truth." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Lucien Giraud, a wiry man with sharp features and a swagger that suggested he owned the very air he breathed. His dark overcoat flapped dramatically as he strode across the fairway, a pipe clenched between his teeth, his assistants trailing like obedient hounds. Giraud's reputation as a rising star in the Paris street preceded him, but to Poirot he was a peacock strutting in a field of logic. "Monsieur Poirot," called, his tone dripping with condescension. "Still poking about, are you? I'd have thought a man of your reputation would leave such matters to professionals." Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes were steel. "The professional, Monsieur Giraud, is not the one who shouts loudest, but the one who sees clearest." Giraud snorted, puffing smoke from his pipe. "See all you like, old man. This case is as good as solved. A lover's quarrel, a jealous son, or perhaps a scorned woman's simple motives, simple clues. I'll have the killer in chains before the week is out." Hastings bristled, but Poirot raised a hand to silence him. "A wager, then," Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Let us test our methods. The first to unmask the murderer claims victory. If I win, you surrender that pipe you cherish so dearly. If you win—" he paused, stroking his mustache, "you may have the pleasure of mocking Hercule Poirot." Giraud's eyes narrowed, but a grin spread across his face. "Bold words. Very well, Poirot. My pipe against your mustache. But don't cry when I shave it off." Hastings stifled a gasp. "Poirot, your mustache, you can't be serious." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Giraud. "I am always serious, Hastings. The little grey cells, they do not jest." The wager sealed, Giraud turned to his assistants, barking orders to comb the golf course for footprints, fibers, anything tangible. His method was meticulous in its physicality. Every blade of grass, every speck of dirt was to be catalogued. Poirot, however, stood motionless, his eyes scanning not the ground but the horizon, as if the answers lay in the curve of the earth itself. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said at last. "Let us leave Monsieur Giraud to his treasure hunt. We have other paths to explore." The village of Merlinville-sur-Mer buzzed with gossip, its cobblestone streets alive with whispers of the murder. Hastings, still reeling from the audacity of Poirot's wager, followed his friend toward the local café, Le Coqty, or the air was thick with the aroma of fresh bread and strong coffee. The café's terrace overlooked the sea, and its patrons fishermen, shopkeepers, and a smattering of tourists cast curious glances at the dapper Belgian detective and his companion Dot as they settled at a table. Hastings' attention was snagged by a familiar figure, the spirited young woman from the Calais Express, the one who had exclaimed "hell" at the passing scenery. She sat alone at a corner table, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her fingers tapping restlessly on a glass of lemonade. Her presence was like a spark in a dry field, and Hastings felt an inexplicable pull toward her. "Poirot," he whispered, nudging his friend. "That's her, the girl from the train, the one I told you about." Poirot followed Hastings' gaze, his expression unreadable. "The young lady with the penchant for colorful language. Intriguing. But focus, mon ami. We are here to gather information, not to chase butterflies." Before Hastings could protest, the woman looked up, her eyes locking with his. A mischievous smile curved her lips, and she waved him over with a flick of her wrist. Hastings hesitated, glancing at Poirot, who gave a slight nod, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Go, Hastings. Perhaps your butterfly has wings of secrets." Hastings approached her table, his heart thudding. We met on the train," he began, fumbling for words. "Captain Arthur Hastings." She leaned back, her smile widening. "Dulcie Duvin, actress extraordinaire. And you're the chap with the crooked tie, aren't you? Don't worry, it's charming in a bumbling sort of way." Hastings flushed, straightening his tie instinctively. "I say, that's a bit forward, isn't it?" Dulcie laughed, a sound like bells. "Life's too short for tiptoeing, Captain. So, you're mixed up in this murder business, aren't you? The whole village is talking about it. Poor Monsieur Renaud, stabbed in a bunker of all places." Hastings seized the opportunity. "You've heard about it then? Any interesting rumors?" Dulcie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, plenty. They say Renaud was mixed up with some shady type smugglers maybe, or worse. And there's talk of a woman seen skulking near the villa at midnight. A lover, perhaps, or a spy." Her eyes sparkled with mischief, but there was a sharpness beneath it, as if she were testing him. Hastings' mind raced. A woman at midnight. Could it be Eloise Renaud, or perhaps the mysterious neighbor, Madame de Breuil? Before he could press further, Dulcie stood, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've got a rehearsal to catch, Captain, but I'll be around. Don't lose that tight's growing on me." She sauntered off, leaving Hastings both flustered and intrigued. He returned to Poirot, who was sipping his coffee with an air of supreme satisfaction. "Well," Poirot prompted, "did your Mademoiselle Duvan provide enlightenment?" "She mentioned a woman seen near the villa at midnight," Hastings said, lowering his voice. "Could be important, don't you think?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Very important, Hastings. A witness, perhaps, or a player in this drama. We must find this midnight visitor." The investigation led them to the local post office, a quaint building with peeling paint and a perpetually grumpy clerk named Monsieur Lefoire. Poirot, with his usual charm, coaxed the man into revealing that a villager, Madame Dubois, had mentioned seeing a cloaked figure near Villa Genevieve the night of the murder. Madame Dubois, a baker's widow with a penchant for late-night walks, lived on the outskirts of Merlinville. The trek to her cottage was a study in contrasts. Poirot, fastidious and precise, navigated the muddy path with the grace of a cat, while Hastings stumbled over roots, muttering about the indignity of it all. The cottage itself was a riot of color, its garden bursting with roses and lavender, and Madame Dubois greeted them with a flower-dusted apron and a wary smile. "Monsieur Poirot, is it?" she said, wiping her hands. "I heard you were sniffing about. What do you want with an old woman like me?" Poirot bowed, his charm disarming. "Madame, your eyes, they see what others miss. We are told you saw a figure near Villa Genevieve at midnight. Tell us, if you please, what you witnessed." Madame Dubois hesitated, then gestured for them to sit at her kitchen table, where a tray of fresh brioche awaited. "It was past 11, maybe closer to midnight," she began, her voice low. "I was walking home from the church. My knees ache, but walking helps. I saw a woman, cloaked, moving quickly near the villa's gate. She looked furtive, like she didn't want to be seen. I couldn't see her face, but she carried something, a bag, perhaps, or a bundle." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "And this woman, madame, did she come from the villa or approach it?" "She was leaving," Madame Dubois said firmly, "heading toward the cliffs. I thought it odd, but with all the goings-on at that villa, I didn't linger." Hastings scribbled notes, his excitement palpable. "A woman leaving the villa at midnight, Poirot. This could be the key." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, Hastings, or perhaps it is a thread in a much larger tapestry." Back at the golf course, Giraud was in his element, directing his team like a conductor. With a baton, he knelt beside a patch of grass, triumphantly holding up a single strand of dark hair. "Aha," he crowed. "A woman's hair, no doubt. The lover, the scorned mistress here, is the evidence." Poirot, standing at a distance, raised an eyebrow. "A hair, Monsieur Giraud. And what does it tell you?" "That a woman has walked this earth." "Mon Dieu, you have solved the mystery of humanity itself." Giraud's face reddened. "Mock all you like, Poirot. This hair will lead me to the killer, while you chase shadows and theories." Poirot's voice was soft, almost pitying. "Theories, monsieur, are the scaffolding of truth. You build with bricks, I build with ideas." The tension between them crackled, their methods as opposed as fire and ice. Giraud's focus was relentless, physical, grounded in the tangible footprints, hairs, cigarette butts. Poirot, however, saw the case as a puzzle of the mind, where motives and secrets interlocked like pieces in a mosaic. Hastings, caught between them, felt a surge of loyalty to Poirot, but he couldn't deny Giraud's confidence was compelling. As they left the golf course, Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the villa's silhouette against the setting sun. "Hastings," he said quietly, "this case, it is not about what we see, but what we do not see. The woman at midnight, the letter in Renaud's pocket, the oversized coat, these are not accidents. They are the brushstrokes of a careful artist." Hastings frowned. "You think the killer planned every detail?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I think, mon ami, that the killer believes they have, but no one outwits Hercule Poirot." That evening, at Le Coq d'Or, the atmosphere was livelier, with locals and visitors mingling over wine and laughter. Hastings spotted Dulcie again, this time performing an impromptu monologue for a group of amused fishermen. Her voice carried across the terrace, rich and animated, as she recounted a tale of a shipwrecked sailor and his mermaid lover. Hastings watched, captivated, until Poirot nudged him. "Focus, Hastings. Your heart, it flutters, but your mind must remain sharp." Hastings blushed. "I'm focused, Poirot. But she's remarkable." Poirot chuckled. "Remarkable. Yes, and perhaps not as innocent as she seems. Keep your eyes open, mon ami." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the café's entrance. Giraud stormed in, his face alight with triumph. "Poirot," he called, holding up a small object wrapped in cloth. "A button, found near the grave, engraved with a crest, a noble family. Perhaps the killer's carelessness will be their undoing." Poirot examined the button, his expression unreadable. "A fine discovery, Monsieur Giraud. But tell me, does a killer leave such a clue by accident, or by design?" Giraud scoffed. "You see conspiracies everywhere, Poirot. This button will lead me to the truth, while you philosophize." As Giraud swaggered off, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The button. It is interesting. Yes, but it is the woman at midnight who holds the key. Tomorrow we shall visit Madame de Breuil. Her secrets, I suspect, are not as well hidden as she believes." Chapter 5. The missing sun. The morning sun hung low over Merlinville-sur-Mer, casting long shadows across the manicured fairways of the golf course that bordered Villa Genevieve. The air was crisp, tinged with the briny scent of the nearby sea, and a faint mist clung to the ground, swirling around the ankles of Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings as they stood at the edge of the crime scene. The freshly dug grave where Paul Renaud's body had been found was now cordoned off with twine, a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the quiet seaside town. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the terrain, while Hastings shifted uneasily, his thoughts tangled with the mystery on a certain auburn-haired woman. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the morning's hush, "you are distracted again. This is no time for daydreams. The son of Monsieur Renaud, Jack, is missing, and his absence speaks louder than any clue we have yet uncovered." Hastings flushed, adjusting his hat to hide his embarrassment. "I'm not daydreaming, Poirot. I'm just, well, it's a lot to take in. Jack Renaud, gone. It doesn't look good, does it? I mean, the fellow's father is murdered, and now he's vanished. If I were Inspector Giraud, I'd say he's our man." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the trampled grass near the grave. Inspector Giraud, he sees only what is obvious, a cigarette butt here, a footprint there, and he builds a castle of conclusions. Nan, Hastings, we must look deeper. The absence of Jack Renaud is not proof of guilt, but a piece of the puzzle. Why does he flee? From whom, or to whom? The previous days had been a whirlwind of revelations. Paul Renaud's murder, stabbed with a letter opener and left in a shallow grave, had set Merlinville abuzz. Inspector Giraud, the brash young detective from the Paris street, had dismissed Poirot's methods, focusing instead on physical evidence like the oversized overcoat found on the body and a cryptic love letter in Renaud's pocket. Poirot, undeterred, had uncovered a torn scrap of paper and a woman seen near the villa at midnight, each clue tightening the web of intrigue. But now, Jack Renaud's disappearance had thrown the case into sharper focus, and Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that the key to the mystery lay just out of reach. They had learned from the villa's staff that Jack, a lanky young man, with his father's sharp features and a restless spirit, had argued bitterly with Paul Renaud the night before the murder. The subject, according to the housekeeper, Madame Leclerc, was money. Jack's demand for a larger allowance to fund his dreams of independence. He stormed out. "Monsieur," she had told Poirot, her hands wringing a dishcloth, shouting that his father was a tyrant. "I heard him say he'd leave for good if he didn't get his way." Hastings kicked at a pebble, his brow furrowed. "Sounds like motive to me, Poirot. A hot-headed son, a controlling father, a row over cash. It's a classic setup. Maybe Jack snapped, and now he's on the run." Poirot raised a gloved finger, his expression stern. "You leap, Hastings, like a grasshopper, from one idea to another. A motive, oui, but not the only one. We must consider all possibilities. The little grey cells, they do not rest on assumptions. Come, let us walk the grounds. There is something here, I feel it." They moved along the edge of the golf course, the dew-soaked grass soaking the hem of Poirot's trousers. He didn't seem to notice, his attention fixed on the landscape. The fairway stretched out like a green carpet, dotted with sandbunkers and framed by a line of cypress trees. Beyond, the sea glinted under the rising sun, its waves whispering secrets. Hastings' thoughts, however, drifted to Dulcie Dut, the spirited actress he'd met on the train. Her laugh, her bold exclamation of hell at the scenery, and their chance encounter in Merlinville's market square yesterday had left him smitten. She'd teased him about his tie, her green eyes dancing, and he'd fumbled his words like a schoolboy. Now, with Jack missing, he wondered if Dulcie knew more about the Renals than she let on. Poirot, Hastings ventured. Do you think Dulcie Miss Duvan, could be tied to this? She's been in Merlinville a while, performing at the local theatre. Maybe she knows Jack. Poirot's eyes narrowed, a glint of amusement flickering within them. Your heart, Hastings, it leads your head astray. Miss Duvan is charming. But we do not yet know her role in this drama. For now, we focus on Jack. His absence is a thread, and we must pull it gently to see where it leads. Their walk brought them to a small copse of trees near the 9th hole, where a was raking a bunker. The man, wiry and sunbrowned, paused to wipe his brow, eyeing the strangers warily. Poirot approached, his demeanor polite but commanding. Bonjour, monsieur. You work the course? Yes. Have you seen Monsieur Jack Renaud in the past days? The groundskeeper, who introduced himself as Etienne, scratched his chin. Young Jack, I saw him 2 nights ago, near dusk. He was pacing by the villa's gate, looking like a storm cloud, muttering to himself. Didn't see him after that. Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing the edge of his mustache. And was he alone? Etienne hesitated, glancing toward the villa. There was a girl with him, briefly, dark hair, pretty, but nervous-like. She left quick, and he stayed, pacing. That's all I saw. Hastings' pulse quickened. A girl, did you catch her name? Etienne shook his head. Nan, monsieur. She wore a scarf, kept her head down, didn't want to be seen, I reckon. Poirot thanked the man and led Hastings away, his pace brisk. A girl. Hastings. Another thread. We must discover who she is and what she meant to Jack. But first, we return to the villa. There is something I must examine. Back at Villa Genevieve, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and suspicion. Eloise Renaud, Paul's widow, sat in the drawing room, her face pale but composed. She wore a black silk dress, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady despite the strain, have you found my son? Jack is no murderer. He loved his father, despite their quarrels. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Madame, I seek only the truth. Tell me, when did you last see Jack? Eloise's eyes flickered with uncertainty. The night before it happened. He was angry, yes, but he left for his room after dinner. I thought he was still here when her voice broke, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Hastings, standing by the window, noticed a figure moving in the garden, a woman in a grey coat, her movements furtive. He squinted, trying to place her, but she vanished behind a hedge. Poirot, he whispered, there's someone out there. Poirot joined him, his gaze following Hastings' line of sight. Curious, he murmured, let us investigate. They stepped into the garden, the air cool and fragrant with roses. The woman was gone, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught something glinting in the grass, a monogrammed handkerchief, its edges embroidered with the initials J.R. He held it up, his expression triumphant. Voila, Hastings. A clue, perhaps, from our missing son, or perhaps, a deception. Hastings frowned. J.R. could be Jack Renaud, but why leave a handkerchief here? Poirot tucked the handkerchief into his pocket, his mind clearly racing. Why, indeed, it is too convenient. Nan, we must consider if someone wishes us to believe Jack is near or to lead us away from the truth. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Giraud, his face flushed with triumph. He strode into the garden, brandishing a small evidence bag. Poirot, he called, his voice dripping with smugness. I've found it, the key to the case. A cigarette butt, near the grave, with traces of a rare Turkish tobacco. Only one man in Merlinville smokes this brand, Jack Renaud. Poirot's expression remained impassive. A cigarette butt. Inspector, you build your case on ashes. Tell me, did you find fingerprints, saliva, anything to prove it was Jack's? Giraud faltered, his confidence wavering. Well, no, but the tobacco is smoked by others. Perhaps, Poirot interrupted. You chase shadows, Giraud, while the truth lies elsewhere. But it is nothing, a distraction. Giraud's face reddened, but before he could retort, a commotion erupted at the villa's gate. Dulcie Duvan, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, stormed toward them, her eyes blazing. "Hastings," she called, ignoring Giraud entirely. "I heard you're looking for Jack. I saw him last night at the theater. He was with some girl, arguing in the alley. I didn't catch much, but he looked scared." Hastings' heart leaped, both at her presence and her news. "Dulcie, you're sure it was Jack? What did the girl look like?" Dulcie shrugged, her lips curling into a playful smile. "Dark hair, slim, a bit like me, but less charming. Look, I've got a show tonight, but I can poke around if you need me to. Jack's mixed up in something, that's for sure." Poirot studied her, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Duvan, your information is most valuable. But tell me, why were you at the theater so late?" Dulcie's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Rehearsal ran long. I'm playing Juliet, you know. Lots of dying dramatically. To practice." She winked at Hastings, who blushed furiously. As Dulcie sauntered off, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "She is clever, that one. But cleverness can hide as well as reveal. We must watch her, Hastings." The day unfolded. With more questions than answers, Poirot interviewed the villa's staff, uncovering whispers of Jack's gambling debts and a mysterious visitor who'd come to the villa weeks before, cloaked in secrecy. Hastings, meanwhile, couldn't shake Dulcie's words. Jack, scared, with a dark-haired girl, the handkerchief, the cigarette butt, the groundskeeper's storiette, all swirled in his mind, a puzzle with too many pieces. By evening, they gathered in the villa's library, where Poirot spread out a map of the golf course, marking the grave, and the copse where the handkerchief was found. "Hastings," he said, his voice grave, "Jack Renaud is either a fugitive or a victim. The handkerchief, it is a clue, but not to his guilt. Someone wishes us to follow a false trail. Tomorrow, we search for this girl, and we find Jack before it is too late." As the moon rose over Merlinville, casting silver light on the fairways, Hastings felt a surge of determination. With Poirot's mind and his own heart guiding them, they would unravel the mystery of the missing son. But in the shadows, unseen, the truth waited, sharp as a blade and twice as deadly. Chapter 6. The neighbor's secret. The morning mist clung to the fairways of Merlinville-sur-Mer, shrouding the golf course in a ghostly veil that seemed to whisper of secrets yet uncovered. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes damp from the dew, stood at the edge of Villa Genevieve's garden, his sharp eyes fixed on the neighboring estate. The Daubreuil residence, a stately manor, half hidden by ancient yews, exuded an air of quiet menace, its windows dark and uninviting. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings rubbed his hands against the chill, his thoughts drifting to Dulcie Duvan, the spirited actress whose chance encounter on the Calais Express had left him inexplicably charmed. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've been staring at that house for 10 minutes. What's so special about Madame Daubreuil? She's just a neighbor, surely." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of amusement or irritation. Hastings could never quite tell. "Just a neighbor, mon ami. Nan. In a case such as this, no one is just anything. Madame Daubreuil's frequent visits to Villa Genevieve, her guarded demeanor, her daughter's curious intensity, these are threads in a tapestry, and I intend to unravel them." Hastings frowned, his breath visible in the cool air. "You think she's involved in Renaud's murder? But why? She's a widow, well off, respectable. What motive could she have?" "Motive," Poirot said softly, "is like a shifts with the light. Come, let us pay a visit to this respectable widow, and see what shadows we may find." They crossed the narrow lane separating the two estates, the gravel crunching underfoot. The Daubreuil manor loomed closer now, its stone facade weathered but imposing, its gardens meticulously tended yet oddly lifeless. Poirot knocked sharply on the heavy oak door, his small frame radiating authority. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a maid with a pinched face and wary eyes. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice tinged with a local accent. "Madame is expecting you." "Expecting us?" Hastings muttered, glancing at Poirot. "How does she know we're coming?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The guilty, Hastings, are always expecting someone." They were led into a drawing room that contrasted sharply with the opulence of Villa Genevieve. The Daubreuil home was austere, its furniture dark and heavy, its walls adorned with somber portraits of stern-faced men and women. A faint scent of lavender hung in the air, mingling with the musty odor of old books. Madame Daubreuil stood by a tall window, her silhouette framed against the grey morning light, She was a striking woman, perhaps in her late 40s, with sharp cheekbones and dark, penetrating eyes. Her black dress was elegant but severe, and her posture suggested a woman accustomed to command. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth but guarded, "and Captain Hastings, to what do I owe this visit?" Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Madame, we are investigating the tragic death of your neighbor, Monsieur Paul Renaud. As you were a frequent visitor to his home, I thought you might share some insights." Madame du Breul's lips tightened, but she gestured to a pair of chairs. "Please, sit. I was shocked to hear of Paul's death. He was a dear friend." Hastings, settling into a stiff-backed chair, noted the slight hesitation in her words. "A dear friend?" he asked. "You visited often then?" "Often enough," she replied, her tone cool. "Paul and I shared an interest in art. He had a fine collection of South American pieces, and we would discuss them over tea." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Art, madame, most interesting. And did these discussions ever touch on other matters? Business, perhaps, or secrets?" Her gaze flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Secrets? I'm not sure what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. Paul was a private man, but we spoke only of trivial things." At that moment, the door opened, and a young woman entered. Her presence, like a sudden burst of sunlight in the gloomy room. Marthe d'Aubreuil, Madame's daughter, was a vision of youth and intensity, with auburn hair cascading in loose waves and eyes that burned with a quiet fire. She wore a simple green dress that clung to her slender frame, and her movements were quick, almost predatory. "Mamang," Marthe said, her voice low but urgent, "you didn't tell me we had guests." Madame Dubreul's expression softened, but only slightly. "Marthe, this is Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings. They're here about poor Monsieur Renaud." Martha's eyes darted to Poirot, then to Hastings, lingering on the latter with a curious intensity. "A terrible thing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw him only yesterday, walking the golf course. He seemed distracted." Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "Distracted, mademoiselle? In what way?" Marthe hesitated, glancing at her mother. "He was pacing near the bunker, muttering to himself. I couldn't hear what he said, but he looked frightened." Madame du Breul's hand tightened on the arm of her chair, a movement Poirot did not miss. "Marthe, you shouldn't speculate. Paul was often lost in thought. It was his way." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet, Mademoiselle Marthe, your observation is most valuable. Tell me, did you see anyone else near the golf course yesterday? Anyone unusual?" Martha's eyes flickered to her mother. Again, a silent exchange that Poirot noted with interest. "No," she said finally. "No one." The conversation was interrupted by a soft thud from the hallway. Hastings, ever alert, rose to his feet, but Madame Dubreul waved a dismissive hand. "Just the maid, no doubt. She's clumsy with the silver." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "Of course, madame, but if you will permit, I would like to see the rest of your home. It is, after all, so close to the scene of the crime." Madame d'Aubreul's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, but she nodded. "Very well. Marthe, show them the library. I have matters to attend to." As Madame d'Aubreul swept from the room, Marthe led Poirot and Hastings down a dimly lit corridor to a library that smelled of leather and dust. The shelves were lined with volumes on history, philosophy, and, curiously, true crime. A large desk stood in the corner, its surface cluttered with papers and a single photograph in a silver frame. Hastings, drawn to the photograph, picked it up. It showed a younger Madame d'Aubreul, her arm linked with a man whose face was partially obscured by a shadow. "Who's this?" he asked, holding it up. Martha's expression tightened. "An old friend of Maman's. He's no longer with us." Poirot, who had been examining the bookshelves, turned sharply. "An old friend, mademoiselle. And what was his name?" Marthe hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. I don't recall. It was before my time." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, instead moving to the desk. His fingers brushed over a stack of letters, and with a swift, almost imperceptible motion, he slipped one into his pocket. Hastings, catching the movement, raised an eyebrow but held his tongue as they left the library. Hastings overheard a snatch of conversation from an adjoining room. Madame de Breul's voice, low and urgent, drifted through the crack in the door. "We must protect our future, Marthe. No matter the cost. Hastings froze, his heart racing. "Poirot," he whispered. "Did you hear that?" Poirot nodded, his expression grim. "I heard, mon ami, and it confirms what I suspected. Madame d'Aubreul is no mere neighbor. She is a player in this game, and a dangerous one." They returned to the drawing room, where Madame d'Aubreul awaited, her composure restored. "I trust you found the library to your satisfaction?" she asked, her tone laced with irony. "Most enlightening," Poirot replied, his smile enigmatic. "We shall not take more of your time, madame, but rest assured, we will meet again." As they stepped back into the misty morning, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into the lion's den. "Poirot, what was that about? You think Madame d'Aubreul is hiding something?" "Hiding?" Poirot chuckled. "Softly, mon ami. She is not hiding, she is concealing. There is a difference, and that photograph, that letter I took, they are keys to a lock we have yet to find." Back at Villa Genevieve, the investigation took a new turn. Inspector Giraud, his face flushed with triumph, greeted them at the door. "Poirot, I've made an arrest. A vagrant, found lurking in the woods, with a bloodied rag in his possession. The case is closed." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Closed, Monsieur Giraud? Non, you have caught a pawn, perhaps, but the queen remains at large." Giraud's face darkened. "You mock me, Poirot. This vagrant was seen near the bunker the night of the murder. He's our man." "Seen by whom?" Poirot asked, his voice sharp. "And this bloodied rag, has it been tested? Is it even human blood?" Giraud faltered, his confidence wavering. "We'll test it, of course, but the evidence is clear." "Clear as mud," Poirot muttered, turning to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, we have work to do." In the privacy of Renaud's study, Poirot produced the letter he had taken from the d'Aubreul library. It was yellowed with age, addressed to "My dear Jean" in a bold, masculine hand. The contents were cryptic, speaking of a past we cannot escape, and a promise that binds us still. But it was the signature that made breath catch. "Georges Queneau." "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and urgent. "This name, Georges Queneau, do you know it?" Hastings shook his head. "Should I?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity. 22 years ago, in Paris, a man named Georges Queneau was at the center of a scandal, a murder, a betrayal, a woman named Madame Baroldi. And now, here in Merlinville, we find his name again, linked to Madame d'Aubreul." Hastings' jaw dropped. "You mean Madame d'Aubreul is Madame Baroldi?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice a whisper. "And this, mon ami, changes everything." The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, its implications vast and unsettling. Poirot paced the study, his mind racing, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that grew more complex with each passing hour. Hastings, struggling to keep up, felt a surge of excitement tinged with dread. The golf course, the villa, the d'Aubreul Manor were pieces in a game of shadows, and Poirot was determined to win. As they stepped back into the garden, the mist had begun to lift, revealing the golf course in all its stark beauty. But to Hastings, it seemed less a place of leisure and more a battlefield, where every blade of grass hid a clue, and every shadow a threat. Poirot, undeterred, adjusted his hat and set off toward the village, his steps brisk and purposeful. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice alive with determination. "The past has spoken, and now we must listen. Madame Baroldi's secret is the key, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall turn it." Chapter 7. The second corpse. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Merlinville-sur-Mer golf course, its golden light doing little to dispel the chill that clung to the air. The fairways, usually alive with the chatter of players, and the thwack of clubs, were eerily silent, cordoned off by the local police. Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stood at the edge of a bunker, where a new discovery had turned an already baffling case into a labyrinth of deception. A second body, a tramp, his ragged clothes stained with blood, lay sprawled in the sand. A letter opener identical to the one that killed Paul Renaud protruding from his chest. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and exasperation as he surveyed the scene. "Mon ami," he said, his voice crisp as the sea breeze, "this is no coincidence. A second corpse, stabbed with such precision, in the same manner as Monsieur Renaud. Nan, this is a performance, and we are its unwilling audience." Hastings, his face pale from the grim sight, adjusted his hat nervously. "But why, Poirot? What's the point of killing a tramp? And with the same weapon?" His thoughts flickered briefly to Dulcie Duvin, the spirited actress he'd met on the train, whose infectious laugh and auburn curls had become a distracting refrain in his mind. He pushed the image aside, focusing on the grotesque tableau. Before him, Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering over the letter opener without touching it. "Observe, Hastings. The wound is clean, deliberate, yet the blood is scant. Curious, Nan." He glanced up at Inspector Giraud, who was barking orders at a pair of gendarmes nearby. "Monsieur Giraud, what say your famous methods about this?" "Poor soul." Giraud strode over, his mustache bristling with indignation. "Another murder, Poirot, and another nail in Jack Renaud's coffin. The boy's motive grows clearer. Eliminate his father, then silence this vagrant who saw too much. My men are combing the area for more evidence." He held up a cigarette butt, pinched between his fingers like a trophy. "This was found near the body. It matches the one from Renaud's grave. Case closed." Poirot's smile was thin, almost pitying. "Closed. Mon cher Inspecteur, your case is as open as the sky above us. A cigarette butt proves nothing but that someone smoked, and this tramp's death is not what it seems." He rose, brushing sand from his impeccable suit. "Hastings, come. We must consult the doctor before Giraud's enthusiasm buries the truth." They found Dr. Marcel Durand, the local coroner, in a makeshift tent set up near the crime scene. The doctor, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, was scribbling notes on a clipboard. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, looking up, "this is a strange business. The tramp's death is not as straightforward as it appears." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Precisement. Tell me, doctor, what do your examinations reveal?" Durand adjusted his glasses, his voice low. "The man died of an epileptic seizure, likely hours before the stab wound was inflicted. The letter opener was thrust into his chest, post-mortem. There's no bruising, no defensive wound zone. The seizure's aftermath, and that blade," Hastings gasped. "Post-mortem? You mean someone stabbed him after he was already dead?" "Exactement," Poirot murmured, his fingers drumming on his cane. "This is no murder, Hastings, but a charade. Someone wished us to believe this tramp was killed like Renaud. But why? To confuse, to distract, or to hide a greater truth?" Giraud, overhearing, scoffed. "Nonsense. A dead man stabbed is still a murder. You complicate what is simple, Poirot. Jack Renaud is our man, and I'll prove it." Poirot ignored him, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the cliffs met the sea. "Doctor, the time of the seizure, can you estimate it?" Durand frowned, consulting his notes. "Based on rigor and body temperature, I'd say between midnight and 2 a.m. The stabbing occurred later, perhaps at dawn." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Mercy, doctor, you've been most illuminating." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, we must revisit the villa. The answers lie not in the sand, but in the hearts of those who walk above it." As they walked back to Villa Genevieve, Hastings couldn't shake the image of the tramp's lifeless form. "Poirot, this is madness. Why stage a second murder? And how does it connect to Renaud?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Connect, Hastings. It is the connection itself that is the key. The tramp's death is a mirror, reflecting Renaud's murder, but distorted. Someone wishes us to see a pattern, but it is a false one. The little grey cells, they protest this deception." At the villa, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and suspicion. Eloise, Renaud, still pale from her ordeal, sat in the drawing room, a shawl draped over her shoulders. The maid, Jean, hovered nearby, offering tea that went untouched. Poirot bowed to Eloise, his manner gentle but probing. "Madame, forgive the intrusion, but a new development requires your insight. A second body has been found, a tramp, killed in the same manner as your husband. Did you know of any such person near the villa?" Eloise's eyes widened, her hand clutching the shawl. "A tramp? No, I never saw anyone like that. Paul mentioned vagabonds on the golf course sometimes, but nothing specific." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady, almost too steady. Poirot noted it, filing it away. "And last night, madame, you heard nothing after the intruders left? No sounds from the golf course?" She shook her head. "Nothing. I was bound, terrified. I only heard my own heart pounding." Hastings, standing by a window overlooking the fairway, caught a glimpse of movement near the hedge, a flash of auburn hair. His heart leaped. "Poirot," he whispered, "I think I saw Dulcie out there." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Turning back to Eloise, Merci, madame, we will trouble you no further for now. Outside, Hastings hurried toward the hedge, his pulse racing. Sure enough, Dulcie Duvin was there, crouched behind a shrub, her eyes wide with excitement. Captain Hastings, she exclaimed, springing up, fancy catching you here. I was just exploring. Hastings, flustered, tried to maintain his composure. Exploring? Miss Duvin, this is a crime scene. What are you doing skulking about? Dulcie grinned, undaunted. Skulking? Oh, that's a bit harsh. I'm curious, that's all. Heard about the second body, and thought I'd have a look. I'm an actress. You know, love a good mystery. She tilted her head, her curls catching the sunlight. Find anything juicy yet? Poirot, who had followed at a leisurely pace, studied her with a mix of amusement and suspicion. Mademoiselle Duvin, your curiosity is most convenient. Tell me, what have you seen in your explorations? Dulcie's smile didn't waver. Not much, I'm afraid. Just a lot of police trampling the grass. But I did notice something odd last night, near the cliffs, a light, flickering, like someone signaling with a lantern. Poirot's interest sharpened. A light, you say? At what hour? Oh, around midnight, I think. I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk. Thought it might be smugglers. Romantic, isn't it? Hastings, smitten despite himself, chuckled. Smugglers? You've been reading too many novels. Miss Duvin, perhaps, she said, winking. But I know what I saw. If you're clever, Monsieur Poirot, you'll check it out. Poirot bowed slightly. Your observation is noted, mademoiselle, but I advise caution. Curiosity, like fire, can burn the unwary. As Dulcie sauntered off, Hastings stared after her, his heart doing an inconvenient jig. She's something, isn't she, Poirot? Something, yes, Poirot replied, his tone dry. But what, exactly, remains to be seen. Their next stop was the local tavern, a weathered building, near the docks where the tramp was rumoured to have spent his final hours. The barkeep, a burly man named Gaston, confirmed the tramp known only as Claude had been there the previous evening, drinking cheap wine and muttering about a big score. He said he'd seen something at the villa, Gaston recounted, wiping a glass, something worth money, but he was half mad, always talking nonsense. Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. And did he say what this something was? Gaston shrugged. Just that he'd seen a lady and a man arguing by the golf course. Said the lady had a knife, and he was going to make her pay to keep quiet. Hastings' eyes widened. Blackmail. That's a motive for murder. Poirot, perhaps. Poirot said, his fingers steepled. But a dead man cannot collect. No, this Claude was a pawn, not a player. As they left the tavern, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. Poirot's pace quickened, his cane tapping a determined rhythm. Hastings, we must return to the golf course. The light, mademoiselle. Duvin sit is a piece of the puzzle, but it does not yet fit. At the cliffs, the wind was sharper, carrying the roar of the sea below. Poirot examined the ground, his eyes scanning for any sign of Dulcie's lantern. Near a jagged outcrop, he found it a patch of scorched grass, as if a flame had briefly touched it. Interesting, he murmured. A signal, perhaps, but to whom? And why here? So far from the villa. Hastings, trying to keep up, ventured a theory. Could it be the intruders Eloise mentioned, signaling to an accomplice? Poirot's smile was cryptic. Or a distraction, mon ami. This case is a tapestry of misdirection, woven by a hand, both clever and desperate. Their investigation was interrupted by a shout from the golf course. A gendarme waved them over, his face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, we've found something, a satchel, hidden in the bushes. The satchel was old, its leather cracked, but inside was a treasure trove, a map of the golf course with the bunker marked, a vial of laudanum, and a woman's glove, embroidered with the initials E.B. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he held up the glove. E.B. again. The ghost of Baroldi haunts us. Hastings, Eloise Baroldi, Hastings asked, his mind racing. But she's the victim, isn't she? Bound and gagged. Poirot's expression was unreadable. Victim, yes, but perhaps not only a victim. This glove, this laudanum, they suggest a plan, one that required a body to play a part. Back at the inn, over a dinner of bouillabaisse and crusty bread, Hastings couldn't resist pressing Poirot. You think Eloise staged this, but why? And the tramp, how does he fit? Poirot sipped his wine, his gaze distant. The tramp, Hastings, was meant to be Paul Renaud, Imagine it. A man, desperate to escape his past, plans to stage his death. He finds a body a tramp, dead of natural causes, and dresses it in his clothes, stabs it with his wife's dagger. But someone clever turns his plan against him, killing him for real and leaving the tramp as a false echo. Hastings stared, his spoon halfway to his mouth. That's diabolical. But who would do such a thing? Poirot's smile was grim. That, mon ami, is the question. The answer lies in the shadows of Renaud's past and in the heart of whoever holds the name Baroldi. The next morning Poirot insisted on revisiting the villa's study. There, among Paul Renaud's papers, he found a hidden compartment in the desk, containing a single letter. It was addressed to E.B., and spoke of a debt long unpaid, a secret that could destroy them both. The signature was illegible, but the tone was menacing, hinting at blackmail. As they left the villa, Hastings spotted Dulcie again, this time near the cliffs, sketching the landscape with a pencil and pad. He hurried over, unable to resist her pull. "Miss Duvan, you're everywhere. What are you drawing?" Dulcie grinned, showing him a sketch of the cliffs, the lantern's scorched patch subtly included. "Just capturing the drama of murder. It's got a certain mystery, don't you think?" Poirot, joining them, studied the sketch with interest. "Very detailed, mademoiselle. You have an eye for the significant. Perhaps you will share more of your observations." Dulcie laughed, tucking the sketchbook away. "Only if you share yours, Monsieur Poirot. A girl's got to keep some secrets." As she walked away, Hastings sighed. "She is impossible, Poirot, but I can't help liking her." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Like her, yes, but trust her, that is another matter. Come, Hastings. The day grows short, and the truth awaits." They spent the afternoon interviewing locals, piecing together Claude's final days. A fisherman recalled seeing the tramp near the villa 2 nights before, talking to a woman in a dark cloak. She gave him something, the fisherman said. Looked like money. He was grinning like he'd won a fortune. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. Eloise, the glove, the laudanum, the lantern, Baroldi. As night fell, he stood on the cliffs, the sea crashing below, and murmured, "The tramp was the key, Hastings, but not as a victim. He was a tool, used to stage a death that never happened until it did." Hastings, exhausted but enthralled, could only nod. The mystery was deepening, each clue a thread in a tapestry of deceit, and somewhere, in the shadows of Merlinville, the killer watched, waiting for Poirot's next move. Chapter 8. The Lover's Confession. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Merlinville-sur-Mer, painting the cobblestone streets with streaks of gold and amber. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the distant murmur of the sea, but an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the village. The murderer Paul Renaud had stirred the quiet town into a frenzy of whispers and suspicion, and nowhere was this more evident than at Villa Genevieve, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stood on the veranda, overlooking the golf course where the tragedy had unfolded. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, gazed out at the fairway, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "The heart, Hastings," he said, his voice soft but weighted with purpose. "It is the heart that betrays us all. Love, jealousy, fear, these are the currents that carry men to their doom." Hastings, adjusting his hat against the glare, frowned. "You think love is behind this murder, Poirot? It seems more like greed or revenge to me." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Greed, revenge, these are but masks. Beneath them lies the heart, mon ami. And today, I suspect, we shall see it unmasked." Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of a breathless messenger, a young boy from the village post office, clutching a crumpled note. "Monsieur Poirot," he gasped, thrusting the paper forward. "From Mademoiselle Duvan, she says. It's urgent." Hastings' heart skipped a beat at the mention of Dulcie Duvan, the spirited actress who had captivated him since their encounter on the Calais Express. He snatched the note before Poirot could, unfolding it with eager fingers. The message was scrawled in a hurried hand. "Meet me at the old boathouse by the cliffs. I know something about the murder. Come alone, Bella." Bella, Hastings said, his brow furrowing. "Not Dulcie, but they're twins, aren't they? This must be her sister." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took the note, studying it with the intensity of a jeweler examining a flawed gem. "Bella Duvan, the lover of Jack Renaud. Oui, this is most interesting, but why does she ask for you to come alone, Hastings?" And why the boathouse, so far from prying eyes? Hastings straightened, a flush of determination coloring his cheeks. I'm going, Poirot. She might have the key to this whole mess. Poirot raised a hand, his expression stern. You will not go alone, mon ami. The heart, it is unpredictable, and danger follows close behind. We go together. The path to the boathouse wound along the rugged cliffs overlooking the sea, where gulls wheeled and cried against the endless crash of waves. The boathouse itself was a weathered structure, its timbers greyed by salt and time, nestled in a cove, where the tide lapped hungrily at the shore. As Poirot and Hastings approached, the wind carried the faint sound of sobbing, raw and broken. From within, inside, Bella Duvin sat on a splintered bench, her auburn hair dishevelled, her face streaked with tears. She was the mirror image of Dulcie, yet her demeanour was worlds apart. Where Dulcie sparkled with mischief, Bella seemed weighed down by an invisible burden. At the sight of Hastings, she leapt to her feet, her eyes wide with panic. You came, she cried, her voice trembling. But you weren't supposed to bring him. She gestured at Poirot, who stood calmly in the doorway, his hands folded over his walking stick. Forgive the intrusion, mademoiselle, Poirot said, bowing slightly. But Captain Hastings is under my protection, and I do not trust urgent summons to lonely places. Now, tell us, what do you know of the murder of Paul Renaud? Bella's hands twisted together, her breath hitching. I did it, she whispered, the words barely audible over the roar of the sea. I killed him. I found his body on the golf course, and I thought Jack had done it. I couldn't let him be caught, so I took the blame. Hastings gasped, stepping forward. Bella, that's madness. Why would you confess to something you didn't do? Her eyes met his, brimming with desperation. Because I love Jack. He's everything to me. We were going to run away together, start a new life, but his father, Paul Renaud, was cruel, always controlling Jack, threatening to cut him off. When I saw the body, the letter opener in his back, I thought Jack had snapped. I couldn't let him hang for it. Poirot's gaze was unyielding, his voice gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, you say you found the body. Tell me, where was this letter opener, precisely, and what did you do next? Bella faltered, her hands trembling. It was in his back, near the shoulder. I didn't touch it. I ran to the villa, looking for Jack, but he wasn't there. I thought he'd fled, so I came back to the body and decided to say it was me. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and yet, mademoiselle, the letter opener was identified as belonging to Madame Eloise Renaud. How did it come to be in your possession? Bella's face crumpled, and she sank back onto the bench. I don't know. I swear, I didn't take it. I panicked. Hastings, torn between sympathy and suspicion, knelt beside her. Bella, you're not making sense. If you didn't kill him, why confess? You're protecting someone. But who? Before Bella could answer, the door of the boathouse burst open, and Inspector Giraud strode in, his pipe clenched between his teeth, his eyes blazing with triumph. Behind him were two gendarmes, their hands resting on their revolvers. Mademoiselle Bella Duvin, Giraud declared, you are under arrest for the murder of Paul Renaud. Bella cried out, shrinking back, but Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Monsieur Giraud, you are hasty. The confession of Mademoiselle Duvin is a fabrication, a shield for another. You would arrest an innocent woman while the true killer laughs at your folly. Giraud's face reddened. Innocent, she admits to the crime. I have her confession, and I have this. He produced a small purse, holding it aloft like a trophy, found near the villa, with her initials BD, and inside, a train ticket stub for the Calais Express, dated the night of the murder. She was there, Poirot, at the scene. Hastings' heart sank as he recognized the purse. It was indeed Bella's, a gift he'd seen Dulcie admire enviously. But Poirot remained unruffled, examining the purse with a delicate touch. A ticket stub, Monsieur Giraud, and what does it prove? That Mademoiselle Duvin travelled. So did half of You build your case on sand, Giraud scoffed, motioning to the gendarmes. Take her to the station. We'll see what sand holds when she faces a judge. As the gendarmes escorted Bella away, her sobs echoing in the boathouse, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice urgent. Poirot, we can't let them take her. She's lying to protect Jack. I'm sure of it, but Giraud won't listen. Poirot's eyes were distant, his mind already racing ahead. Calm yourself, Hastings. The confession of Mademoiselle Bella is a puzzle, but not the solution. The ticket stub, the purse, these are pieces, but they do not fit. We must look to the timeline, to the moments before and after the murder. That evening, Poirot and Hastings returned to Le Coq d'Or, the village cafe now abuzz with the news of Bella's arrest. The locals whispered behind their hands, casting wary glances at the two outsiders. Dulcie Duvan was there, her face pale but her eyes blazing as she stormed toward their table. "You let them take her," she accused, her voice trembling with fury. "Bella's no killer, and you know it. She's covering for Jack, that fool of a boy who's probably halfway to Paris by now." Hastings rose, his hands outstretched. "Dulcie, we're doing everything we can. Poirot thinks Bella's confession doesn't hold up. Doesn't hold up." Dulcie snapped, her auburn hair catching the candlelight like fire. "She's in a cell because of you two meddling about. If you'd left it to Jack would be the one in chains, not my sister." Poirot's voice was calm, cutting through her anger like a breeze. "Mademoiselle Dulcie, your loyalty to your sister is admirable, but your emotions cloud your judgment. Tell me, when did you last see Mademoiselle Bella before her confession?" Dulcie hesitated, her defiance faltering. "Last night, at our lodgings. She was upset, pacing, muttering about Jack. I thought she was just worried about him. But then, she slipped out after midnight. I didn't know where she went until I heard about this confession nonsense." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "After midnight, you say? And did she carry anything? A purse, perhaps?" Dulcie frowned, her memory straining. "Her purse, yes. The one with her initials. She always has it with her." "Why does that matter?" Poirot did not answer, instead turning to Hastings. "Mon ami, we must reconstruct the night of the murder. The ticket stub in Bella's purse, it is dated, yes, but for what time? And why was it found near the villa, when Bella claimed she was at the golf course?" Hastings' mind raced, trying to keep up with Poirot's rapid deductions. "You think someone planted the purse to frame her?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I think, Hastings, that the truth is a delicate thing, easily manipulated. Come, we must visit the railway station." The Merlinville railway station was a modest affair, its platform deserted, save for a lone ticket clerk dozing behind his counter. Poirot, with his usual charm, roused the man and inquired about the Calais Express on the night of the murder. The clerk, bleary-eyed but eager to help, produced a logbook, confirming that a ticket had been purchased for a late train, but not by Bella Duvan. The ticket was bought by a woman. "Yes," the clerk said, scratching his chin. "But she was older, with dark hair and a veil. Paid in cash, didn't give a name. I remember because she seemed in a hurry, kept looking over her shoulder." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "A veil, you say? Most intriguing. And this ticket, it was for the 11:45 departure." The clerk nodded. "Aye, the last train out that night." As they left the station, Hastings was practically vibrating with excitement. "Poirot, this changes everything. Bella couldn't have bought that ticket if she was with Dulcie at midnight. Someone else was at the villa, someone who left that purse to throw us off." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Oui, Hastings. The purse, the ticket stub, these are not accidents. They are the work of a mind that seeks to deceive. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily fooled." Their next stop was the police station, where Bella sat in a cramped cell, her face pale but resolute. Giraud was there, smug as ever, reviewing his notes with a satisfied smirk. "You're wasting your time, Poirot," he said, not looking up. The girl confessed. "The evidence is clear. The case is closed." Poirot's voice was icy. "Closed, Monsieur Giraud? Then you are blind to the truth. Allow me to see Mademoiselle Bella, and I shall show you how a confession can unravel." Reluctantly, Giraud allowed them access to the cell. Bella looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, it was me. Stop digging, or you'll ruin everything." Poirot sat across from her, his gaze steady. "Mademoiselle, you are brave, but your lie is flawed. The ticket stub in your purse, it was for the 11:45 train, purchased by a woman with a veil. You were with your sister at midnight, were you not? You could not have been at the station." Bella's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot pressed on, his voice gentle but relentless. "You found the body, you say, on the golf course. Yet the letter opener was not removed, and the body was already cold, was it not? Tell me, when did you truly arrive at the scene?" Bella's resolve cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It was later," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. After 1 in the morning, I went looking for Jack, but he wasn't at the villa. I found his father on the golf course, already dead. I thought Jack had done it, so I lied to protect him." Poirot leaned back, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "And the purse, mademoiselle? You dropped it near the villa, not the golf course?" "Oui." Bella nodded, her voice breaking. "I was running, scared. I didn't even realize I'd lost it, until later." Hastings, standing by the cell door, felt a surge of relief. "Poirot, she's telling the truth. She didn't kill Renaud." Giraud, overhearing, scoffed. "A pretty story, but it changes nothing. She's still a suspect, and Jack Renaud is still missing. I'll have them both in chains soon enough." Poirot rose, his expression serene. "You chase shadows, Monsieur Giraud. The truth lies not in confessions, but in the gaps between them. Mademoiselle Bella, you are free for now." As they left the station, Hastings couldn't contain his excitement. "Poirot, you've done it. You've disproved her confession. But who planted the purse, and where's Jack?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Hastings. The purse, the ticket, the veiled woman, these are threads in a tapestry of deception. We must find Jack Renaud, for he holds the next piece, and I suspect, mon ami, that the heart of this mystery beats closer to home than we think." Hastings' jaw dropped. "A deception? Poirot, he's talking about faking his death, isn't he? Like the tramp's body we found." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Oui, Hastings. Paul Renaud planned to stage his death, to vanish, as he did 22 years ago. But someone who knew his secret, turned his plan against him. This letter, it is the final piece of the puzzle's frame. Now, we must fill it in." The day unfolded with a flurry of activity. Poirot sent a telegram to Paris, requesting more records on the Queneau case, while Hastings ventured into town to question Dulcie Duvin. He found her at the theatre, rehearsing a scene from Romeo and Juliet. Her auburn hair glowed under the stage lights, and she flashed him a teasing smile. "Captain Hastings, come to play Romeo to my Juliet, or are you still chasing ghosts?" Hastings blushed but pressed on. "Dulcie, you mentioned seeing Marthe with Jack. Did you overhear anything specific? Anything about his father?" Dulcie's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "I heard them arguing about money, and something about a plan. Jack sounded desperate, like he was in over his head. Marthe kept saying she'd fix everything. That's all I got before they spotted me and clammed up." Hastings relayed the information to Poirot, who was now pacing the villa's garden, his mind racing. "Marthe d'Aubrel," he murmured. "She is the key. Her love for Jack, her mother's past, it all converges. But we need proof, Hastings. Proof that she knew of Renaud's plan and acted upon it." As night fell, the air grew heavy with the promise of a storm. Poirot and Hastings returned to the inn, where a cryptic note awaited them, slipped under the door. It read, "Leave Merlinville, or the truth will bury you." The handwriting was unfamiliar, the threat chilling. Hastings' pulse quickened. "Poirot, this is getting dangerous. Someone doesn't want us digging into Queneau's past." Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination. "Let them threaten, Hastings. The little grey cells, they do not yield. Tomorrow, we confront Marthe de Bruel. The ghost of Georges Queneau will haunt us no longer." Chapter 9. The Ghost of Georges Queneau. Dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains of the modest Merlinville, in where Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings had taken temporary lodging. The air was thick with the scent of fresh coffee and warm bread, but Poirot's mood was far from the cozy comfort of the breakfast table. His eyes, sharp and restless, scanned a dossier of yellowed newspaper clippings spread across the table, each one a fragment of a 22-year-old murder case that had just cast a long shadow over the death of Paul Renaud. Hastings, nursing a cup of tea, watched his friend with a mix of curiosity and impatience, his mind still reeling from the whirlwind of clues they'd uncovered in Merlinville-Sur-Mer. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence. "You've been staring at those papers since we got back from Paris last night. What's so blasted important about this old Queneau case? I mean, Renaud's dead, Jack's still missing, and that Giraud fellow's probably out there arresting the wrong man as we speak." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his amusement. "Mon ami, you are like a dog with a bone, always gnawing at the present. But the past, Hastings, it is the soil from which the present grows. This case of Georges Queneau, it is not merely history, it is the key to the murder of Paul Renaud." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You're saying Renaud was mixed up in that old scandal? The one with Madame Barrault? I thought she was just the neighbor, Madame de Brawl." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of revelation. "Exactement, and now we know she is more. Madame de Brawl is Madame Baroldi, and Paul Renaud was none other than Georges Quinault himself, a man who fled justice, changed his name, and built a new life only to have the past catch him like a hunter's snare." The revelation had come late the previous evening, after a grueling day in Paris. Poirot had insisted on a trip to the city to dig into the archives of the Paris Script, leaving Hastings to fend off Inspector Giraud's smug assertions back. In Merlinville, the Quinault case, a sensation in its day, involved a wealthy Frenchman, Georges Quinault, and his lover, Madame Baroldi, accused of murdering her husband in a sordid affair gone wrong. The trial had collapsed when Quinault vanished, and Baroldi was acquitted on a technicality. The newspapers had painted a lurid picture of betrayal and greed, and now Poirot suspected that old crime had resurfaced in the form of Paul Renaud's murder. The inn's dining room was quiet, save for the clink of cutlery from a nearby table, where a grizzled fisherman was devouring a plate of eggs. Poirot gathered the clippings, tucking them into his leather satchel. "Come, Hastings," he said, rising with purpose. "We return to Merlinville. There is much to do, and the threads of this mystery are beginning to weave together." The train back to Merlinville was a rattling affair, its windows streaked with morning dew. Hastings, unable to resist, brought up Dulcie Duvon, the spirited actress who had captured his heart. "I ran into Dulcie again yesterday, Poirot. At the market she was buying flowers, carnations, I think, and she said something odd. Mentioned seeing Marthe Daubrel arguing with Jack Renaud outside the theatre a few nights ago. Do you think Martha's involved?" Poirot's gaze flickered to the passing countryside, where vineyards gave way to sandy dunes. "Mademoiselle Marthe Daubrel, the daughter of Madame Baroldi, is a most intriguing figure. Her affection for Jack Renaud complicates matters. If she loves him, as you suggest, her motives may be tangled love, greed, or perhaps fear of her mother's past. We must tread carefully, Hastings. The heart, it is a dangerous compass." Back in Merlinville, the town buzzed with gossip. The discovery of a second body, a tramp, stabbed with the same letter opener as Renaud, had sent shockwaves through the community, and Giraud's arrest of a local vagrant had only fueled the speculation. Poirot, however, was convinced that Tramp's death was a ruse, a staged act to obscure Renaud's murder. As they approached Villa Genevieve, the grand estate loomed against the grey sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Inside, Eloise Renaud greeted them with a strained smile. Her black morning dress seemed to weigh her down, and her eyes darted nervously toward the garden. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found Jack?" "The police inspector Giraud say he's guilty, but I know my son, he could never." Poirot raised a hand, his tone soothing but firm. "Madame, I seek only the truth. Tell me, did your husband ever speak of his life before South America? Of a time, perhaps, when he was known by another name?" Eloise's face paled, her fingers tightening around her handkerchief. "Another name? I don't know what you mean. Paul was always Paul. He made his fortune in Chile, in mining. He never spoke of anything else." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet, madame, the past has a way of speaking for itself. We shall see." Hastings, standing by the fireplace, noticed a small photograph on the mantel, a faded image of a younger Paul Renaud, standing beside a woman with dark, intense eyes. The resemblance to Madame de Brawl was unmistakable. He nudged Poirot, pointing discreetly. "Look at that, Poirot. That's her, isn't it, Madame Baroldi?" Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the photograph. "Oui, Hastings, a most interesting find. This confirms what I suspected. Paul Renaud and Madame de Brawl were bound by more than neighborly acquaintance. Their past, it is a chain that links them to this crime." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion. At the front door, Marthe Daubrel, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, stormed into the room, her face flushed with anger. "Monsieur Poirot, why are you harassing my mother? She's done nothing wrong. You and your questions, you're tearing this town apart." Poirot regarded her calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mademoiselle, I seek only to untangle the truth. Your mother, she was once known as Madame Baroldi, Nan, and Paul Renaud, he was Georges Quinault. Tell me, what did you know of their history?" Martha's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her voice sharp. "I don't know what you're talking about. My mother is a respectable woman, and I won't have you slandering her." Hastings, unable to resist, stepped forward. "Miss Dalbrell, we know you were seen with Jack Renaud. Were you in love with him? Did he tell you anything about his father's plans?" Martha's gaze flickered, a mix of defiance and fear. "Jack and we were friends. He was troubled, yes, but he didn't kill his father." "You're barking up the wrong tree, Captain." Before Poirot could press further, a maid burst into the room, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, there's something in Monsieur Renaud's study, a letter, hidden in a book. I found it while dusting." Poirot's eyes lit up, and he followed, the maid with Hastings in tow. The study was a grand room, its walls lined with leather-bound books, and a heavy oak desk cluttered with papers. The maid pointed to a volume of Voltaire, its spine slightly askew. Poirot carefully extracted it, revealing a folded letter tucked inside. The handwriting was Renaud's, the ink fresh. He read aloud, his voice steady. "My dear friend, I fear my past has found me. The shadow of Georges Cunning looms large, and I cannot escape it. I have planned a way out, a deception to protect my family, but I fear it may come too late. If you find this, know that I acted out of love." Back at their table, Poirot was sipping his coffee, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "Well, Hastings, did your Cinderella reveal any secrets?" Hastings hesitated, then decided against mentioning the notebook just yet. "Not exactly. She's charming, though. Said she's in town for a show." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Charming, yes, but charm, mon ami, can be a mask. Keep your wits about you." Their coffee was interrupted by the arrival of a breathless messenger, a boy no older than 12, who handed Poirot a folded note. Poirot read it quickly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting," he murmured, passing it to Hastings. The note, written in a hurried scrawl, read, "Meet me at the old mill. 8 p.m. I know something about the will. Come, alone." It was unsigned. "Another trap?" Hastings asked, his voice low. "Perhaps," Poirot said, folding the note carefully. "But a trap can catch the trapper as well as the prey. We shall go, but not alone. You, Hastings, will be my shadow." As dusk settled over Merlinville, the old mill on the outskirts of town loomed like a relic from a forgotten age, its weathered stones moss-covered, and its wheel long stilled. The air was cool, carrying the faint hum of crickets, and the distant lap of the sea. Poirot, dressed in a dark overcoat to blend with the shadows, moved with the precision of a cat, while Hastings followed, his nerves taut. They reached the mill just as the church clock struck 8. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior where dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight. A figure stood in the center of the room, cloaked in shadow, a woman, her silhouette unmistakable. "Marthe Dobrul," Poirot said, stepping forward. "You sent the note." Marthe turned, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, I had to speak with you. I heard about the will about Jack being disinherited. It's not right. He loved his father, despite their quarrels." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, mademoiselle, you stand to gain much if Jack were to inherit your mother's ambitions. Your own dreams, they hinge on his fortune, do they not?" Martha's breath caught, and for a moment her composure faltered. "You don't understand. I loved Jack. I would never hurt him more, his father, but my mother." She trailed off, her eyes darting to the door. Before Poirot could press further, a rustling came from outside, followed by a muffled cry. Hastings, acting on instinct, rushed to the door, only to find a man slumped against the mill wall, clutching his side. It was the vagrant Giraud had arrested, his face bruised and his clothes torn. "Help!" the vagrant gasped. She paid me to stay quiet." "Who?" Poirot demanded, kneeling beside him. The vagrant's eyes flickered with fear. "The woman, dark hair, sharp eyes. Said she'd make it worth my while if I took the blame for the murder." Hastings' mind raced. "Madame Dobrul." The vagrant nodded weakly, then slumped unconscious. Poirot's expression was grim as he rose. "Marthe, you will come with us. This ends tonight." They returned to Villa Genevieve under a starless sky, Marthe silent and pale beside them. Giraud, summoned by a hastily sent message, met them at the villa, his face a mask of frustration. "What now, Poirot? Another of your theatrics?" "No theatrics, Monsieur Giraud," Poirot said calmly. "Merely the truth. Mademoiselle Marthe, tell him what you told me." Martha's voice trembled as she spoke. "My mother, She knew about the will. She said it was our chance, that we could secure our future if Jack inherited. But I swear, I didn't know she'd go this far. Jill's eyes widened. Madame Dubrow, you're accusing her now. Poirot held up a hand. Not accusing, monsieur, proving the vagrant's testimony. The letter from Georges Queneau. The will's timing all point to a woman whose past and present are intertwined with this crime. As Giraud stormed off to summon his men, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The trap is set, mon ami. Tomorrow, when Eloise makes her announcement, we shall see who takes the bait. Chapter 10. The Disinherited Heir. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Merlinville golf course, its golden rays glinting off the dukist fairways as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stood outside Villa Genevieve. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant temps of the sea. But an undercurrent of tension pulsed beneath the serene facade. The murder of Paul Renaud had unraveled into a labyrinth of secrets, and Poirot's latest discovery that Renaud had altered his will just 2 weeks before his death had sent ripples through the investigation. The new will disinherited his son Jack in favor of his wife Eloise, a revelation that deepened the mystery and pointed accusing fingers in unexpected directions. Poirot, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the chaos of the case, adjusted his hat and fixed his piercing gaze on the villa's grand facade. Mon ami, he said, his voice low and deliberate, this change in the will is no mere whim. It is a pivot, a turning point in our puzzle, and I suspect it points not only to motive but to a deeper deception. Hastings, whose thoughts were tangled with the image of Dulcie Duvine's mischievous smile, nodded absently. It's a rotten thing to do to one's own son, isn't it? Cutting Jack out like that. No wonder he argued with his father. But do you really think it's enough to drive him to murder? Poirot's eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and exasperation. Hastings, you leap to conclusions like a grasshopper. Nan, I do not believe Jack Renaud is our killer, but this will it casts a shadow, and within that shadow, we may find our true culprit. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Giraud, his stride as brash as ever, his face flushed with the smug certainty of a man convinced. He's cracked the case. Poirot, he called, waving a sheaf of papers. I've got the proof I need. This new will strengthens the case against Jack Renaud. He had motive disinherited, angry, desperate. My men are closing in on him as we speak. Poirot's smile was polite but razor sharp. Monsieur Giraud, your enthusiasm is admirable, but your focus is, as always, too narrow. A will does not a murderer make. Have you considered, perhaps, who else might benefit from this change? Giraud's eyes narrowed. Who else? Eloise Renaud, of course, but she was bound and gagged, a victim herself. Or are you suggesting she staged it all? Poirot raised a hand, his expression enigmatic. I suggest nothing, monsieur. I merely observe. And what I observe is that this will implicates another someone whose future depended on Jack Renaud's inheritance. Giraud scoffed, but before he could retort, Poirot turned to Hastings. Come, mon ami, we must speak with Madame Renaud again, and then I have a little trap to set for our elusive prey. They found Eloise Renaud in the villa's conservatory, a glass-walled sanctuary filled with exotic plants and the soft hum of a fountain. She sat on a wicker chair, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale but composed. The grief that had marked her earlier seemed tempered now, replaced by a quiet resolve that Poirot noted with interest. Madame Poirot began bowing slightly. Forgive our intrusion, but we must discuss a matter of great importance. The will of your late husband, when did you learn of its change? Eloise's eyes flickered, but her voice was steady. 2 days before his death, Paul told me he'd revised it to ensure my security. He said Jack was too reckless, too young to handle the estate. I tried to dissuade him, but he was adamant. Adamant, Poirot repeated, his tone soft but probing. And did Jack know of this change? Eloise hesitated, her fingers tightening around a lace handkerchief. I believe Paul told him. They argued fiercely that evening. Jack stormed out afterward. I haven't seen him since. Hastings, leaning against a potted palm, frowned. Madame, do you think Jack could have done this? Out of anger? Perhaps. Eloise's gaze dropped to her lap. I don't want to believe it, Captain Hastings. Jack is impulsive, yes, but to kill his own father. It's unthinkable. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Unthinkable, perhaps, but not impossible. Tell me, madame, did anyone else know of this change in the will? A friend, perhaps, or a neighbor? Eloise's expression tightened, and Poirot caught the briefest glance toward the window, where the de Breuil manor was just visible through the mist. No, she said quickly. No one else. Poirot nodded, but his mind was already racing. Merci, madame, you have been most helpful. But I have one request, a small favor, if you will indulge me. Eloise raised an eyebrow. A favor? Oui, Poirot, said his voice smooth as silk. I would like you to make a public announcement, perhaps to the local press, that you intend to disinherit Jack entirely, leaving the estate to a charity. Say it is in honor of your husband's wishes. Can you do this? Eloise's eyes widened. But why? It's not true, and it would devastate. Jack Poirot's smile was reassuring, but his eyes were hard. Trust me, madame, it is a necessary step to flush out the truth. Will you do it? After a moment's hesitation, Eloise nodded. Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I'll make the announcement tomorrow. As they left the conservatory, Hastings pulled Poirot aside, his voice low. What's this about, Poirot? You're not seriously going to let her disinherit Jack, are you? Poirot chuckled softly. Mon ami, you misunderstand. The announcement is a lure, a bait to draw our killer from the shadows, and I believe the one who will take it is Mademoiselle Marthe, Daubreuil Marthe. Hastings' jaw dropped. You think she's the murderer? But why? Poirot's expression darkened. Because, Hastings, Marthe Daubreuil stood to gain. Through Jack's inheritance, if Jack were to inherit her future with Hammond, her mother's ambitions would be secure. But with Jack disinherited, that future is threatened. A desperate woman, mon ami, is a dangerous one. Their conversation was cut short by a commotion in the village square, a short walk from the villa. The Merlinville Café, a quaint establishment with red-checked tablecloths and a bustling clientele, was alive with chatter as locals gathered to discuss the murder. Hastings, eager for a respite from the case's intensity, suggested they stop for a coffee. Poirot, though reluctant, agreed, sensing an opportunity to observe the village's pulse. The café was a whirl of activity, its air thick with the aroma of espresso and fresh pastries. As they settled at a corner table, Hastings' eyes were drawn to a familiar figure near the counter, Dulcie Duvon, her auburn hair catching the light as she laughed with a waiter. Her presence was like a spark in the dim room, and Hastings felt his heart quicken. Poirot, he said, nudging his friend, it's her, the girl from the train. Dulcie. Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. Ah, your Cinderella. Go, mon ami, and speak with her, but do not let your heart distract you from our purpose. Hastings needed no further encouragement. He approached Dulcie, his face flushing as he cleared his throat. Miss Duvon, fancy seeing you here. I didn't expect to run into you. Dulcie turned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Captain Hastings, well, isn't this a treat? I'm just passing through Merlinville, you know. Thought I'd soak up some local color before my next show in Calais. Hastings grinned, momentarily forgetting the case. You're an actress, then? I'd love to hear more about it. Perhaps over a coffee. Dulcie's laugh was infectious. Oh, you're a bold one. But I'm afraid I'm meeting someone shortly. Maybe another time. Captain. Before Hastings could respond, a crash sounded from the counter. A tray of cups had fallen, shattering on the floor. The waiter, a nervous young man with a mop of curly hair, stammered apologies as Dulcie rushed to help him. In the chaos, Hastings noticed a small notebook slip from Dulcie's purse, landing unnoticed beneath a table. He retrieved it, intending to return it, but curiosity got the better of him. Flipping it open, he found a page scrawled with hurried notes. Meet Jay at midnight. Golf course. Don't tell M. Hastings' heart sank. Jay could only mean Jack Renauld. Was Dulcie involved? With him, and who was M. Marthe Daubreuil? He tucked the notebook into his pocket, resolving to show it to Poirot later. Chapter 11. The midnight ambushed. A moon hung low over Merlinville-sur-Mer, its pale light casting ghostly shadows across the manicured lawns of Villa Genevieve. The air was thick with the scent of salt and roses, but an undercurrent of menace pulsed beneath the quiet. Hercule Poirot, his silhouette sharp against the night, stood on the villa's terrace, his cane tapping softly as he surveyed the darkened grounds. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever his loyal companion, hovered nearby, his nerves taut as a boat. The events of the past days, Paul Reynolds' murder, the stage death of the tramp, the elusive name Beroldi, had woven a tapestry of intrigue that seemed to tighten with every hour. Now, Poirot's latest gambit was about to unfold. A trap to unmask the killer Poirot. Hastings whispered, his breath visible in the cool night air. Are you sure this is wise? Provoking Marthe Dalbrul like this, it's dangerous. She's already desperate. Poirot's green eyes glinted with a mix of resolve and mischief. Danger, mon ami, is the crucible in which truth is forged. Marthe Dalbrul is a young woman of passion, and passion, when provoked, betrays itself. Tonight, we shall see her true colors. The plan was audacious. Earlier that day, Poirot had convinced Eloise Renaud to announce publicly that she would disinherit her son, Jack, in a staged conversation at the local café, where Marthe was sure to overhear. The news, Poirot reasoned, would push obsessive love for Jack had already driven her to murder, to act recklessly. The trap was set. Eloise would remain in the villa, seemingly alone, while Poirot and Hastings waited in the shadows, ready to intervene. Inside the villa, the drawing room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the ornate furniture. Eloise sat by the window, her posture rigid, a glass of untouched sherry in her hand. She had agreed to Poirot's plan with reluctance, her pale face betraying the strain of the past week. Monsieur Poirot, she had said earlier, her voice trembling, if Marthe is the killer, what will she do to me? Fear not, Madame Poirot had replied, his tone soothing yet firm. You are the bait, but we are the hunters. She will not harm you while Hercule Poirot watches. Now, as midnight approached, the villa was silent, save for the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Hastings, stationed behind a heavy velvet curtain, clutched a small revolver, his palms slick with sweat. He glanced at Poirot, who stood near the terrace doors, his expression serene but alert. What if she doesn't come? Poirot, Hastings whispered. What if we've misjudged her? Poirot's mustache twitched. Misjudged? Nan, mon ami. Marthe is a creature of impulse, driven by love and fear. She will come, and when she does, we shall have her. The clock in the hall chimed midnight, each note echoing like a warning. Hastings' heart pounded, his thoughts drifting briefly to Dulcie Duvon, the vivacious actress whose auburn curls and bold laugh had ensnared his heart. Her unexpected appearances in Merlinville, first on the train, then near the crime scenes, had left him both charmed and uneasy. Was she merely curious, as she claimed, or was there more to her presence? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. A faint creak broke the silence, the sound of a floorboard in the corridor. Hastings tensed, his grip tightening on the revolver. Poirot raised a hand, signaling silence, his eyes fixed on the door. The handle turned slowly, and a figure slipped into the room, cloaked in shadow. It was Marthe Dalbrul, her dark hair pulled back, her face pale but resolute. In her hand gleamed a small knife, its blade catching the lamplight. Eloise gasped, rising from her chair. Marthe, what are you doing here? Marthe's voice was low, almost a hiss. You know why, madame? You've taken everything from me, Jack. His future, our future. But I won't let you destroy us. Eloise backed away, her hands raised. Marthe, please, put the knife down. We can talk. Martha's laugh was bitter. You think words will change anything. You disinherited him, cast him aside like he's nothing. But he's mine, and I'll protect him, no matter the cost. Hastings' pulse raced, his finger hovering over the trigger. He glanced at Poirot, waiting for a signal, but Poirot's expression was unreadable, his focus absolute. Marthe took a step toward Eloise, the knife gleaming, when a sudden crash shattered the tension. The terrace doors burst open, and Dulcie Duvon stumbled into the room, her eyes wide with panic. Stop, Dulcie cried, her voice cutting through the air. Marthe, don't. Marthe froze, her knife poised, her face a mask of fury and confusion. You, what are you doing here? Dulcie, breathless, held up her hands. I followed you, Marthe. I knew you were up to something. You can't do this, it's madness. Hastings, stunned, stepped out from behind the curtain, his revolver trained on Marthe. Drop the knife, Miss Dalbrul, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. It's over. Martha's eyes darted between Dulcie, Eloise, and Hastings, her grip on the knife tightening. For a moment, it seemed she might lunge, but Poirot's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mademoiselle Dalbrul, you are surrounded by reason, yet you cling to folly. Lower the knife, and let us end this charade. Martha's resolve wavered, her shoulders slumping as the knife clattered to the floor. She sank to her knees, her face crumpling. I only wanted him to be free, she whispered. Free from his father, from you, from everything. Eloise, trembling, sank back into her chair, her eyes filled with tears. Dulcie rushed to her side, murmuring words of comfort, while Hastings kept his revolver trained on Marthe, his mind reeling. How had Dulcie known to come here? And why Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping softly. Mademoiselle Duvaunt, your entrance was most dramatic, but I am curious, how did you know Mademoiselle Dubreuil would act tonight? Dulcie's cheeks flushed, but her gaze was steady. I've been watching her, Monsieur Poirot. She's been acting strange, sneaking around, muttering about Jack. When I heard about the disinheritance at the cafe, I knew she'd do something reckless, so I followed her. Hastings, his heart swelling with admiration, lowered his revolver. That was incredibly brave. Miss Duvaunt. Dulcie flashed a wry smile. Brave or foolish, Captain, take your pick. Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying her. Brave, perhaps, but also convenient. You have a habit of appearing at the right moment, mademoiselle. One might almost think you are part of this drama script. Dulcie laughed, undaunted. Think what you like, Monsieur Poirot. I'm just a girl who can't resist a good story. Before Poirot could press further, Inspector Giraud burst into the room, his face red with indignation. What is this? Another of your theatrics, Poirot. I told you Jack Renaud is the killer, and now you've got his lover in a tizzy. Poirot's smile was icy. Monsieur Giraud, your persistence is admirable, but your conclusions are flawed. Mademoiselle Dubreuil has just attempted to murder Madame Renaud, driven by her obsession with Jack, but I suspect she is also the key to Paul Renaud's death. Giraud scoffed, but his bluster faltered as he saw Martha's defeated form. You have proof. Proof. Poirot's voice was sharp. I have the truth, which is far more potent. But first, we must secure Mademoiselle Dubreuil. The gendarmes, summoned by Giraud, took Marthe into custody, her wrists bound as she was led away, her eyes vacant. Eloise, still shaken, thanked Dulcie profusely, her voice trembling. You saved my life, Miss Duvaunt. I don't know how to repay you. Dulcie shrugged, her grin returning. Just don't disinherit anyone else, madame. It seems to cause all sorts of trouble. As the villa quieted, Poirot led Hastings and Dulcie to the terrace, where the moonlight illuminated the golf course. Beyond, Mademoiselle Duvaunt, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. Your courage is commendable, but your motives are unclear. Why follow Marthe? Why risk your life? Dulcie's eyes sparkled with mischief. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I love a mystery, and Marthe has been acting like a character in a melodrama. I couldn't resist seeing how it played out. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, melodrama. Oui, but every actor has a role, and I wonder what yours truly is. Hastings, unable to stay silent, stepped forward. Poirot, surely you don't suspect Dulcie. She saved Madame Renaud. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. Suspect. Nan, mon ami, I merely observe. Mademoiselle Duvaunt is a puzzle, and I do not yet have all the pieces. Dulcie laughed, tossing her curls. Keep puzzling, Monsieur Poirot. I'm not going anywhere. As she walked away, her silhouette blending into the night, Hastings turned to Poirot, his heart racing. She's extraordinary, isn't she? Brave, clever, and dangerous, Poirot interjected. Do not let your heart blind your eyes, Hastings. She is part of this, whether by chance or design. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to the villa to search Martha's belongings, hoping to find evidence of her guilt. In a small guest room where Martha had stayed, they discovered a locked diary, its leather cover worn but elegant. Poirot, with his usual finesse, picked the lock, revealing pages filled with Martha's looping script. The entries were a window into her mind, her love for Jack, her fear of losing him, her hatred for Paul Renaud, who she believed would ruin their future. One entry, dated 2 days before the murder, was particularly chilling. He plans to fake his death, to escape his past. I heard him talking to Haribi. They think they can outwit everyone, but I won't let them take Jack from me. If he digs that grave, I'll make sure it's his. Hastings' eyes widened. Poirot, she knew about Renaud's plan. She must have killed him when he was setting up the tramp's body. Poirot nodded, his expression grim. Oui, mon ami. Marthe is clever, but her passion betrayed her. She saw an opportunity to eliminate Renaud and secure Jack's inheritance. But the diary, it mentions E.B. again. This name, it haunts us like a spectre. They took the diary to Giraud, who was grudgingly impressed but refused to concede defeat. So, the girl's guilty. Fine. But Jack Reynolds still involved. Mark my words, Poirot. Poirot's smile was wry. Your words, Monsieur are like the wind loud, but they carry little weight. Marthe acted alone, driven by her heart. Jack is innocent, though his absence troubles me. As they left the villa, Hastings couldn't shake the image of Dulcie's dramatic entrance. Poirot, how did Dulcie know Marthe would attack? It's almost too perfect. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perfect, yes. And perfection, Hastings, is often a mask for something else. We shall watch Mademoiselle Duvin closely. That afternoon, they found Dulcie at the local market, haggling over a basket of apples with a vendor. She spotted them and waved, her smile infectious. Gentlemen, care for an apple? They're sweeter than this mystery of yours. Hastings grinned, taking an apple. You're incorrigible, Miss Duvin. Poirot, however, was all business. Mademoiselle, a question. You said you followed Marthe because she was acting strangely. What, precisely, did you see? Dulcie's expression turned serious. She was at the café yesterday, listening to Madame Renaud's conversation. Her face it was like she'd been slapped. Then she slipped out, muttering about fixing things. I knew she was up to no good. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. You are observant, mademoiselle. Perhaps too observant for a mere actress. Dulcie laughed, tossing an apple in the air. You're a suspicious one, Monsieur Poirot, but I like it. Keeps things interesting. As they parted, Hastings couldn't help but feel a surge of affection for Dulcie. She's not part of this, Poirot. She's just Dulcie. Smile was enigmatic. Just Dulcie, perhaps. But every player has a motive. Hastings, even those who charm us most. The day ended with Poirot poring over Martha's diary, cross-referencing it with the clues they'd gathered: the glove, the laudanum, the scorched grass by the cliffs. The picture forms, he murmured, but it is not yet complete. Marthe killed Renaud, but Edith's shadow from the past holds the final piece. As night fell, Hastings lay awake, his mind a whirl of images. Martha's knife, Dulcie's courage, the elusive Baroldi. The mystery was unraveling, but each answer seemed to birth new questions. Only Poirot, with his relentless little grey cells, seemed certain that the truth was within reach if they could survive the shadows long enough to find it. Chapter 12. The French Connection. The twilight sky over Merlinville-sur-Mer burned with streaks of crimson and violet, casting an ethereal glow over the cliffs that hugged the coastline. The village, usually alive with the chatter of fishermen and the clink of wineglasses, had settled into an uneasy hush, as if holding its breath after the whirlwind of events at Villa Genevieve. The murder of Paul Renaud, followed by the dramatic confrontation with Marthe d'Aubreuil, had left the town reeling, and now, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stood outside the local gendarmerie, the weight of the case pressed heavily upon them. Poirot, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat, adjusted his gloves with meticulous care. The truth, Hastings, he said, his voice low and measured, is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe, to reveal its full complexity. Tonight, we shall uncork the final secrets of this affair. Hastings, his tie slightly askew from the day's exertions, shifted uncomfortably. I say, Poirot, you're awfully calm about it all. Marthe tried to kill Madame Renaud, and now her mother's vanished into thin air. How are we going to tie this all together? Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his confidence. By following the threads, mon ami, Martha's actions, Madame d'Aubreuil's disappearance, the letter opener, the grave on the golf course, these are not separate events, but notes in a symphony. And I, Hercule Poirot, am the conductor. Their conversation was interrupted by the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. A horse-drawn cart, driven by a grizzled farmer, pulled up beside them, its cargo hidden beneath a tarp. The farmer, his face weathered like the cliffs themselves, tipped his hat. Monsieur Poirot, word from the village of Étretat. They've spotted a woman matching Madame d'Aubreuil's description, hiding in a fisherman's cottage. Thought you'd want to know. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, monsieur. Your diligence is appreciated. Hastings, come. We must make haste to Étretat. Hastings hesitated, glancing back at the gendarmerie where Inspector Giraud was no doubt fuming over his latest defeat. What about Giraud? Shouldn't we tell him? Poirot's smile was wry. Let Monsieur Giraud chase his footprints. We chase the mind behind the crime. The journey to Étretat was a winding one. the road hugging the cliffs as the sea roared. Below, the cart rattled along, its wheels creaking under the weight of anticipation. Hastings, clinging to the seat, couldn't shake the image of Martha's diary, its pages filled with obsessive scrawls about Jack Renaud and her dreams of a life together. Her confession to Poirot that she had killed Paul Renaud to secure Jack's inheritance had been chilling, but Madame Dubrul's sudden disappearance suggested a deeper layer to the plot. Poirot, Hastings ventured, his voice nearly lost to the wind. Do you think Madame Dubrul knew what Martha was planning? She's been slippery from the start, always lurking about the villa. Poirot's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the lights of Étretat began to twinkle. Madame Dubrul, or should I say Madame Baroldi, is a woman of secrets. Hastings, she has played many roles in her life: lover, conspirator, mother, but her flight suggests fear, not guilt. She knows something, and we shall persuade her to speak. The cart slowed as they entered Étretat, a picturesque village nestled between towering chalk cliffs. The fisherman's cottage, perched precariously near the shore, was a ramshackle affair, its windows dark save for a faint flicker of candlelight. Poirot and Hastings dismounted, the farmer tipping his hat once more before retreating into the night. As they approached the cottage, the door creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow. Madame Dubrul stepped into the moonlight, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and dread. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I knew you would find me. You are as relentless as the tide. Poirot bowed, his courtesy unshaken. Madame, the tide brings all things to light. You have fled Merlinville, but you cannot flee the truth. Tell me, why did you run? Madame Dubrul's lips tightened, and she gestured for them to enter. The cottage was sparse, its air thick with the smell of salt and damp wood. A single candle burned on a rickety table, casting long shadows across the walls. I ran to protect my daughter, she said, her voice low. Martha, she has lost herself to her passions. I knew she was desperate, but I did not know she would kill. Hastings, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. You knew she was planning something, didn't you? Why didn't you stop her? Madame Dubrul's eyes flashed. You think it's so simple, Captain. Martha is my heart, my only child. I tried to guide her, to warn her, but her love for Jack Renaud consumed her. When I overheard Paul Renaud planning to fake his death, I thought it a chance for Martha to escape his influence. I never imagined she would take a life. Poirot's expression was unreadable, his fingers steepled before him. And yet, Madame, you did not come forward. You allowed your daughter to act, to wield the letter opener that ended Paul Renaud's life. Why? Madame Dubrul sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Because I am a coward. Because I, too, have secrets. Paul Renaud was not who he claimed to be. He was Georges Queneau, my lover from years ago, a man who betrayed me and fled. When I came to Merlinville, I recognized him, and he recognized me. He threatened to expose my past if I spoke of his. Hastings' jaw dropped. Blackmail. Renaud was blackmailing you? She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. He knew my presence here would ruin Martha's chances with Jack. I kept silent to protect her, but it drove her to madness. She overheard Renaud's plan to stage his death, to dig a grave for the tramp and disappear. She saw her chance to secure Jack's future, and she struck him down as he dug. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. And you, Madame, what did you do when you learned of this? I found her on the golf course, standing over his body, Madame Dubrul said, her voice breaking. She was trembling, the letter opener in her hand. I told her to run, to hide, while I tried to cover her tracks. But Martha is headstrong. She returned to the villa, determined to confront Eloise Renaud. I fled to Étretat to draw suspicion away from her. Hastings, pacing the small room, couldn't contain his frustration. You let her attack Madame Renaud. If Dulcie hadn't intervened, Eloise would be dead. Madame Dubrul's eyes filled with tears. I know. I have failed her, as I failed myself all those years ago. But I beg you, Monsieur Poirot, spare her. She is young, misguided. She acted out of love. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Love, Madame, does not excuse murder. But the truth, it may yet save her from the guillotine. You must return to Merlinville and face the consequences. The return to Merlinville was a somber affair, the cart rattling through the night as Madame Dubrul sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Hastings, still reeling from her revelations, glanced at Poirot, whose face was a mask of quiet determination. "Poirot," he whispered, "do you believe her? About Renaud being Queneau, about the blackmail?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, Hastings. Her story aligns with the letter we found, the one confirming Renaud's fear of exposure. But there is more to this tale, a final piece we must uncover. Martha's confession, it is true, but incomplete. We must find her before she vanishes, like her mother." Back in Merlinville, the gendarmerie was a hive of activity, with Giraud barking orders to his men. When he saw Poirot and Hastings return with Madame Dubreuil, his face twisted into a scowl. "So, Poirot, you've dragged another suspect into my net. What's this one? Done stolen the silver?" Poirot's smile was icy. "Monsieur Giraud, your net catches minnows while the shark swims free. Madame Dubreuil has provided clarity, but the true prize awaits. Marthe Dubreuil is hiding in a village nearby, and I intend to find her." Giraud's eyes narrowed. "You think you can outdo me again? I've got men scouring the countryside. If Martha's out there, I'll have her in chains before you can twirl that ridiculous mustache." Poirot's voice was calm, almost pitying. "Then, let us see who reaches her first, monsieur. But beware, the truth is not always what it seems." The search for Marthe led them to the village of St. Valery, a cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley 10 miles from Merlinville. Word from a local innkeeper had placed a young woman matching Martha's description at a derelict barn. On the village outskirts, as Poirot and Hastings approached, the night was alive with the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves, the barn looming like a dark sentinel against the starry sky. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay and dust. A lantern flickered in the corner, casting eerie shadows across the rafters. Marthe Dubreuil stood there, her dark eyes wild, her hands clutching a small satchel. At the sight of Poirot, she froze, her breath catching. "You," she whispered, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. "I knew you'd come. You never stop, do you?" Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mademoiselle Marthe, the game is over. You have played your part well, but the curtain must fall. Tell me, why did you kill Paul Renaud?" Martha's laugh was brittle, echoing in the empty barn. "You think you know everything, don't you? Yes, I killed him. He was going to ruin everything, my life, my love for Jack. He was going to fake his death, disappear with his fortune, and leave Jack with nothing. I heard him plotting with that tramp, digging the grave. I saw my chance, and I took it." Hastings, standing by the door, felt a chill run through him. "You stabbed him as he dug? That's cold-blooded, Marthe." Her eyes flashed. "Cold? You know nothing of cold, Captain. My mother and I, we've lived in shadows all our lives, hiding from the past. Jack was my way out, my chance for something real. I couldn't let his father take that from me." Poirot's voice was soft, almost hypnotic. "And the letter opener, Mademoiselle, it belonged to Madame Renaud. How did it come to be in your hands?" Martha's lips trembled, but she held his gaze. "I took it from the villa earlier that day. I knew they'd suspect Eloise, not me. I was careful, Monsieur Poirot. I thought I'd outsmarted you all." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "You are clever, mademoiselle, but not clever enough. The diary, the letter opener, the grave, these were not the work of a mastermind, but of a desperate heart. Come with us now, and face the justice you cannot escape." Before Marthe could respond, the barn door burst open, and Giraud stormed in, his pipe glowing faintly in the dim light. "Got you," he crowed, his gendarmes flanking him. "Marthe Dubreuil, you're under arrest for the murder of Paul Renaud." Marthe's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. As the gendarmes cuffed her, Giraud turned to Poirot, his grin triumphant. "Looks like I win this round, Poirot. My men tracked her here hours ago. Your little grey cells are no match for good police work." Poirot's smile was serene. "Congratulations, Monsieur Giraud. You have caught the fish, but it is I who baited the hook. The pipe, I believe, remains mine." Giraud's face darkened, but he said nothing, turning to escort Marthe to the waiting cart. Hastings, watching her go, felt a pang of pity. "She did it for love, Poirot. It's tragic, in a way." Poirot's eyes softened. "Love, Hastings, is the most dangerous motive of all. It blinds, it consumes, it destroys. But come, there is one final act to play." Back at Le Coq d'Or, the café was alight with celebration. the locals toasting to the capture of the killer. Dulcie Duvon, her eyes bright with relief, approached Hastings, her usual mischief tempered by gratitude. "You did it, Captain," she said, her voice warm. "You and your stuffy detective friend. Bella's free, and Martha's caught. I owe you." Hastings blushed, his heart racing. "I say, Dulcie, it was mostly Poirot, but I'm glad you're pleased." She grinned, stepping closer. "Pleased enough to say yes if you ask me to dinner, or are you too proper for that?" Hastings stammered, his face scarlet. "Dinner, well, I'd be delighted." Poirot, watching from a nearby table, chuckled softly. "Mon ami, you have solved one mystery tonight, the heart of Mademoiselle Dulcie. Now, let us enjoy this moment, for tomorrow we return to the order and symmetry of justice." Chapter 13. The killer's motive. The late afternoon sky over Merlinville-sur-Mer hung heavy with the threat of rain, its grey clouds casting a sombre pall over the seaside town. The air was thick with the scent of salt and pine, and a restless wind stirred the cypress trees surrounding Villa Genevieve. Inside the villa's grand drawing-room, Hercule Poirot stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache impeccably waxed, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man who had just unravelled a Gordian knot. Captain Arthur Hastings sat nearby, his fingers drumming on the arm of a velvet chair, his heart torn between the thrill of the case's climax and his budding romance with Dulcie Duvon. The room was crowded with the key players in the drama: Louise Renaud, Jack Renaud, Inspector Giraud, and the trembling figure of Marthe Dobrul, whose confession was about to lay bare the heart of the mystery. Poirot's voice, clear and measured, cut through the tension like a blade. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have come to the final act of this tragedy. The murder of Paul Renaud, a man who lived under the shadow of his past as Georges Queneau, was no simple crime of passion or greed. It was a calculated act, driven by a motive as old as humanity itself, love twisted into obsession." Marthe Dobrul, seated on a chaise longue, gripped the armrests, her dark eyes wide with defiance and fear. Her severe bun had loosened, strands of hair framing her pale face, like a mourner's veil. "I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice quivering but sharp. "I killed him. I stabbed Paul Renaud. There's nothing more to say." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But why, Mademoiselle you loved Jack Renaud. Why murder his father? It doesn't add up." Poirot raised a gloved hand, his expression serene yet commanding. "Patience, Hastings. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it must be savoured slowly. Mademoiselle Marthe, allow me to recount the events as my little grey cells have pieced them together. You will correct me if I err." Martha's lips tightened, but she said nothing, her gaze locked on Poirot as he began to pace, his polished shoes clicking on the polished floor. The room's other occupants: Eloise, pale and silent; Jack, his face a mask of guilt and relief; and Giraud, sulking by the fireplace, watched with bated breath. "It begins," Poirot said, "with a man who was not what he seemed. Paul Renaud, or rather Georges Queneau, fled France 22 years ago after a scandal that left a man dead, and his lover, Madame Beroldi, now Madame de Brolfrey, but tainted. He built a new life in South America, amassing wealth, but the past is a hunter that never tires. When he returned to France, settling in Merlinville, he thought himself safe, but Madame Dobrul, his former accomplice, was his neighbor, and with her came her daughter, Marthe." Martha's eyes flickered, a spark of anger igniting. "You make it sound sordid, Monsieur My mother loved him once, yes, but that was long ago." Poirot inclined his head, undeterred. "Perhaps, but love, it leaves scars. And you, mademoiselle, you fell in love with Jack Renaud, the son of the man who shared your mother's past. You dreamed of a future with him, a future that required wealth as inheritance. But Paul Renaud, he stood in your way." Hastings shifted, his mind racing. The past days had been a whirlwind, the discovery of Renaud's true identity, the staged death of a tramp to mask the real murder, and Martha's attempt to kill Eloise, thwarted by Dulcie's timely intervention. Poirot's trap: having Eloise publicly disinherit Jack had provoked Marthe into revealing her desperation, leading to her arrest in a nearby village. Now, her confession was the final piece. But Hastings sensed there was more to uncover. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "Monsieur Renaud, he feared exposure. He planned to fake his death, using the tramp's body as a decoy. to escape the blackmail of his past. But you, Mademoiselle Marthe, you overheard his plan. Perhaps you eavesdropped during one of his late-night talks with your mother. You saw an opportunity not to help him, but to eliminate him. Martha's hands trembled, and she stood abruptly, her voice rising. You don't understand. Paul was going to ruin everything. He was going to disinherit Jack, leave him penniless. I heard him tell my mother he'd changed his will, that Jack would get nothing unless he abandoned me. I loved Jack, and I wouldn't let his father destroy our future. Eloise gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marthe, is this true? You killed Paul because of the will? Martha's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was fierce. Yes, he was a tyrant, controlling Jack's life, our life. I followed him that night to the golf course. He was digging the grave for his ridiculous plan, muttering about disappearing. I saw my chance. I took the letter opener from his study earlier that day, and when he turned his back, she faltered, her voice breaking. I stabbed him. I didn't mean to kill him at first, but he laughed, when I begged him to let Jack go. I couldn't stop myself. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Hastings felt a chill, not from the confession's brutality, but from the cold calculation behind it. Martha's love for Jack had twisted into something dark, a force that drove her to murder. Giraud, his face flushed with frustration, stepped forward. You see, Poirot, she confesses. I was right to focus on the family. Jack was involved. I'm sure of it. He must have known. Poirot's gaze cut through Giraud like a rapier. Nan, Inspector. Jack Renaud knew nothing of this. His only crime was to love unwisely, and to argue with his father. You, with your cigarette butts and footprints, you chased shadows while the truth lay in the heart of Mademoiselle Marthe. Giraud bristled but held up his pipe, a reluctant gesture of surrender. Fine, Poirot, you win this round. But don't expect me to wax poetic about your little grey cells. Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. Your pipe, Inspector, is a small price for the truth. Keep it, for now. I have no need of trophies. Hastings, unable to contain himself, turned to Marthe. But why the tramp, Marthe? Why stab him too? Marthe's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. I panicked. After I killed Paul, I realized his plan could work for me. I found the tramp dead near the course. He'd had a seizure, the doctor said later. I dragged him to the grave, dressed him in Paul's coat, and stabbed him to make it look like Paul's body. I thought it would, by time, confuse everyone, until Jack and I could leave. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. A cunning plan, mademoiselle, but flawed. The tramp's death was natural, and your staging, it was too clumsy for the little grey cells to ignore. Jack Renaud, who had been silent, rose from his chair, his face pale. Marthe, how could you? I loved you. But this is madness. Marthe's eyes softened, a flicker of her former self. I did it for us, Jack, for our future. You'll see, one day. The local gendarmes, summoned earlier, entered the room, their boots heavy on the floor. They took Marthe gently by the arms, leading her away as she cast one last, pleading look at Jack. Eloise buried her face in her hands, and Jack turned to the window, his shoulders shaking. Hastings, his heart heavy, glanced at Dulcie, who had slipped into the room during the confession. She stood by the door, her auburn hair catching the fading light, her expression unreadable. Well, Hastings, she said softly, you and your funny little detective wrapped it up, didn't you? Hastings managed a weak smile. Not without your help, Dulcie. If you hadn't stopped Ma that night. He trailed off, the memory of her bravery in saving Eloise vivid in his mind. Dulcie shrugged, her usual spark dimmed. Just doing my bit, but I'll stick to playing heroines on stage from now on. Real life's too messy. As the job escorted Marthe away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The case, it is closed, mon ami. But the heart, it carries scars longer than the law. Come, let us leave this house of sorrow. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the cobblestones. Hastings and Dulcie lingered by the gate, their conversation turning to lighter things. Her next performance, his plans. To visit the theatre. You'll come see me as Juliet, won't you? She teased, her green eyes dancing. Wouldn't miss it, Hastings replied, his heart lifting. Maybe I'll even learn a line or two to impress you. Poirot, overhearing, chuckled. Beware, Hastings. The stage is full of illusions, and Mademoiselle Devanne, she is a master of them. As they walked into the gathering storm, The mystery of Paul Renaud's death settled into the past, but Merlinville, with its secrets and shadows, would linger in their minds. For Poirot, it was another triumph of the little grey cells. For Hastings, it was a step closer to a future with Dulcie, and the promise of new adventures on the horizon. Chapter 14. The Little Grey Cells triumphed. Our late morning sun-bathed villa, Genevieve, in a soft golden glow, its rays filtering through the tall windows of the grand drawing-room, where Hercule Poirot had gathered the key players in the tangled drama of Paul Renaud's murder. The air was heavy with anticipation, the scent of polished wood and fresh roses mingling with the faint tang of sea air drifting in from the Merlinville golf course. The room, with its plush velvet curtains and gleaming chandelier, felt like a stage set for a final act, and Poirot, ever the maestro, stood at its center, his small frame radiating quiet authority. Captain Arthur Hastings sat near the fireplace, his notebook open but forgotten, his eyes darting between Poirot and the assembled company. Eloise Renaud, her face pale but composed. Jack Renaud, newly returned and still shaken, his hands fidgeting with a cigarette. Dulcie Duvon, her auburn hair catching the light as she perched on the edge of a settee, her expression a mix of defiance and curiosity. And Inspector Lucien Giraud, his arms crossed, his scowl barely concealing his grudging respect for Poirot's methods. Absent were Madame d'Aubrol and her daughter Marve, whose arrest the previous evening had sent shockwaves through the village. Poirot adjusted his tie with a precise flick, his moustache impeccable as always, and cleared his throat. "It may seers," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "We are gathered here to unravel the final threads of the mystery that has haunted Merlinville-Sur-Mer. The murder of Paul Renaud was no simple crime. It was a tapestry woven with deceit, ambition, and a past that refused to stay buried. But fear not, for the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot have triumphed." Hastings leaned forward, his heart quickening. He had seen Poirot in such moments before, the grand denouement, where every clue, every contradiction, was laid bare. Yet this case, with its layers of betrayal and hidden identities, felt different, more personal, more intricate. He glanced at Dulcie, who winked at him, her playful demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the facts. Paul Renaud, a man of wealth and charm, was found, dead in a bunker on the golf course, stabbed with a letter opener and buried in a shallow grave. A love letter, an oversized overcoat, a rose petal, these were the clues that greeted us, but they were merely the surface of a deeper truth." Eloise Renaud's voice was soft but steady. "Monsieur Poirot, you've caught the killer. D'Aubrol," she confessed. "What more is there to explain?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, madame, a confession is but a single piece of the puzzle. To understand why Marthe killed, we must journey into the past that binds her mother, Madame d'Aubrol, to your late husband." Jack Renaud, his face drawn, leaned forward. "What does my father's past have to do with this? Marthe said she killed him to secure our future. Isn't that enough?" Poirot raised a finger, his expression stern. "Nan, Monsieur Jack, is not enough. Your father, Paul Renaud, was not who he claimed to be. He was, in fact, Georges Cunning, a man implicated in a murder 22 years ago in Paris, alongside a woman named Madame Beroldi, now known as Madame d'Aubrol." A gasp rippled through the room. Giraud, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. "Cunning, you're saying Renaud was a fugitive, and Madame d'Aubrol was his accomplice?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Let me take you back to that time. Georges Cunning and Madame Beroldi were lovers, entangled in a scandalous affair that ended in the murder of Beroldi's husband. They staged it as a burglary gone wrong, but suspicion fell on them. Cunning fled to South America, where he reinvented himself as Paul Renaud, building a fortune. Madame Beroldi, meanwhile, vanished into obscurity, re-emerging as Madame d'Aubrol, a respectable widow in Merlinville." Hastings, scribbling furiously, paused. "But why come here? Why live next to each other if they wanted to escape their past?" Poirot's smile was wry. "An excellent question, mon ami. Renaud, or rather Cunning, believed his past was buried. But Madame d'Aubrol had other plans. She tracked him to Merlinville, seeking to exploit their shared secret. Blackmail, mise Amos, is a powerful motive. She demanded a share of his wealth, threatening to expose him as Cunning." Eloise's hands trembled. Paul never told me any of this. He said his wealth came from honest business in South America. And so it did, Poirot said gently. But every fortune has its shadows. Renaud agreed to pay Madame to keep her silence, but her demands grew. He devised a plan, a desperate one, to escape her grasp. He intended to fake his own death, using a vagrant's body to deceive the world, and flee with you, Madame, to start anew. Jack's cigarette fell to the floor. Forgotten. Fake his death. You mean the tramp we found the second body? Oui, Poirot said, nodding. The tramp, who died of an epileptic seizure, was to be dressed in Renaud's clothes, stabbed with the same letter opener, and buried in the bunker. Renaud dug the grave himself, believing he could stage the scene and disappear. But Marthe Dobrel overheard his plan. Dulcie, who had been listening intently, spoke up, her voice sharp. Marthe, how did she know? Poirot turned to her, his gaze appraising. Mademoiselle Duvant, your presence in this case has been illuminating. Marthe, enamored with Jack, and desperate to secure her future with him, learned of Renaud's scheme through her mother's whispered conversations. She saw an opportunity not to save Renaud, but to eliminate him. If Jack inherited, she and her mother would control the fortune through her marriage to him. But if Renaud disinherited Jack, as he did 2 weeks before his death, their plans would collapse. Giraud, his patience wearing thin, interrupted. So Marthe killed Renaud because of the will. That's your theory. Not a theory, Monsieur Giraud, Poirot said, his tone sharp. A fact. Marthe overheard Renaud planning to fake his death. She followed him to the golf course that night, where he was digging the tramp's grave. In a moment of cold calculation, she stabbed him with the letter opener, her mother's weapon, kept from their days as Baroldi and Queneau. She left the overcoat, Jack's, to cast suspicion on him, and buried Renaud in the grave he had dug. Eloise's voice was barely a whisper. But why the love letter? The petal? Poirot's eyes softened. The letter, Madame, was a relic of Renaud's pasta note from Madame Baroldi, kept as a reminder of their shared guilt. The petal, a rose from the Dobrel garden, fell from Martha's dress as she fled, a careless clue that confirmed her presence at the scene. Hastings, his mind reeling, leaned back, and the bound wife Eloise's story about the intruders. A fabrication, Poirot said, glancing at Eloise with a mix of sympathy and reproach. Madame Renaud, you are not bound by intruders. You agreed to play your part in Renaud's plan, to claim you were attacked to support the illusion of his murder. But when you found him truly dead, your grief was real, and your story became a shield. Eloise's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I couldn't tell the truth. Paul swore me to secrecy. I thought he was still alive, hiding somewhere. Giraud, his face red with frustration, threw up his hands. This is absurd. You're saying the entire case hinges on a 22-year-old scandal and a girl's obsession. Where's the evidence? Poirot's smile was serene. The evidence, Monsieur Giraud, is in the details. The letter from Queneau, found in Madame Dobrel's library, the vagrant's testimony, paid to take the blame. Martha's diary, detailing her love for Jack and her fear of losing him, and, most importantly, her confession, which I extracted last night in the presence of your own men. Giraud's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence a grudging admission of defeat. Dulcie, however, was not so restrained. Blimey, Poirot, you've got a mind like a steel trap. But what about Jack? He's not going to prison, is he? Poirot turned to Jack, who looked as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. Monsieur Jack, you are free. Your only crime was a youthful rebellion, not murder. You and your mother may now rebuild, perhaps in South America, as your father once dreamed. Jack nodded, his voice hoarse. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know how to repay you. Poirot waved a hand. The truth, monsieur, is payment enough, and perhaps a promise to wear a tie as straight as your friend Captain Hastings attempts to do. Hastings flushed, but Dulcie's laugh broke the tension, her eyes sparkling as she nudged him. Oh, I like you, Poirot. You're a funny little man, but you've got style. Poirot bowed, his moustache twitching with amusement. Merci, Mademoiselle Duvant, and may I congratulate you and Captain Hastings on your burgeoning romance. Hastings' face turned scarlet, but Dulcie only grinned. We'll see about that, monsieur, but I'm sticking around Merlinville a bit longer, just to keep him on his toes. As the group dispersed, Eloise and Jack to plan their future, Giraud to salvage his pride, and Dulcie to tease Hastings mercilessly. Poirot lingered in the drawing-room, his eyes fixed on a small vase of roses. He plucked one, twirling it between his fingers, his expression contemplative. "Hastings," he said softly, as his friend returned from seeing Dulcie to the door, "this case has reminded me of the power of the human heart. Love, greed, fear, they drive us to acts both noble and terrible, but it is the mind, the little grey cells, that bring order to such chaos." Hastings nodded, his thoughts still on Dulcie's parting wink. "You're right, Poirot, you always are. But what now?" "Back to London, Poirot said, adjusting his hat. "But first, a breakfast, a perfectly symmetrical one, with eggs precisely boiled and toast cut to exact proportions, for even the little grey cells require sustenance." They stepped out into the Merlinville morning, the golf course stretching before them, no longer a place of secrets but a silent witness to a mystery solved. As they walked toward the village, Poirot hummed a soft tune, his steps light, his mind already turning to the next challenge. For Hercule Poirot, the game was never truly over, merely paused, waiting for the next puzzle to unravel.